Chapter 195, Feng Kong beheaded, bang. From amidst the cyclone, a figure directly flew out and fell into the sea. Ahem. Feng Kong coughed out blood, his internal organs were injured. He was a bit embarrassed, but the killing intention hadn't disappeared from his eyes. Feng Kong's face appeared somewhat pale. He realized that he lost the match of energy exhaustion to Yi Shiwen, because in the previous attack, he used up a large portion of his energy. He put his final bet on this attack but never expected that Yi Shiwen would actually manage to survive. As the blast dispersed, everyone saw Yi Shiwen's figure standing motionless like a mountain. He appeared like an absolute existence, a tyrant-like figure, standing in the center while the sea water was spinning around him. Amazing, the technique just used by Feng Kong is one of a kind. It is said that Feng Kong is the only one in his generation who knows this secret technique. But even a legendary secret sword technique was unable to injure Yi Shiwen, so tyrannical. Feng Kong was unable to display the full might of this technique. If it was used by the sect elders, then you would have seen how powerful it really is. But he still managed to display most of its true might, so I must say that Yi Shiwen is quite amazing to be able to sustain it. Yes, it's absolutely rare for someone from the younger generation to display such a horrifying technique. But the 8th prince used to be at this level almost 10 years ago, so I still think that Yi Shiwen is not his match. You are making a mistake, it's the 8th prince who wants to fight him, not the other way round. 8th prince wants to use him as a stepping stone, as the first page of his world domination campaign, but unfortunately, it seems like it won't be easy to use Yi Shiwen as a stepping stone. I'm afraid, it will take a lot more than this. You're stronger than I expected. Feng Kong got up, wiped the blood off the corner of his mouth and looked coldly at Yi Shiwen, but because of this, you will have to die. I won't allow anyone to come in 8th prince's way, and those who do must die. Feng Kong shouted and Zhen Yuan exploded out of his body. He took one step, and at this time, his killing intention started taking form behind him. A shadow gradually emerged out his sword and was constantly releasing terrifying imposing aura. With each step of Feng Kong, that shadowy figure would grow taller. Everyone looked at this shadow and felt as if an ancient king had come back to life, and with each step that Feng Kong took, huge amounts of sea water vaporized simultaneously. Countless sea beasts also vaporized along with the sea water. A sword god. Yi Shiwen suddenly frowned and was somewhat startled in his heart. This sword god's incarnation was somewhat similar to the Devil King's ghost, which resided in Tianyuan Mirror. But, he was also aware of the enormous amount of energy consumption associated with the use of such a kind of summoning technique. In fact, if he tried to summon the Devil King's ghost from Tianyuan Mirror even once, he would have to burn countless spirit stones. But Feng Kong actually did it. Yi Shiwen carefully observed and saw that Feng Kong's complexion was turning pale, his face was already covered in sweat, gradually dripping down on the ground, and with each step he took, the sword god's coercion would become more powerful and getting closer to Yi Shiwen. Soon, Yi Shiwen was overwhelmed by the fierce coercion of the sword god. What a crazy guy, a thought appeared in Yi Shiwen's mind. The sword god would grow stronger and much fiercer with each step one would take, but at the same time, the energy consumption would be greater as well. Of course, this consumption would be enormous and even Yi Shiwen would not be able to withstand it, so how could Feng Kong possibly achieve it without paying a huge price? It didn't take much long for Yi Shiwen to realize that Feng Kong was not actually consuming his Jin Yuan, but his life energy. He was basically burning out his life force. Unlike Yi Shiwen, Feng Kong lacked the valuable resource of top-grade spirit stones, especially when there was a requirement of 1,000,000. Such a huge amount was needed to be consumed in order to summon such a giant sword god. Although this sword god was nowhere close to an existence like Devil King, but was more than what Feng Kong could afford at this moment. So he had no choice but to use his own life force. Yi Shiwen saw Feng Kong's original youthful appearance gradually shifting towards an elderly appearance. This so-called 8th prince was really worth it. Yi Shiwen could not understand. Even most of disciples among the spectators did not understand. Although they were unaware of the amount of consumption needed to perform such an attack, but they were not foolish enough to miss the visible change in Feng Kong's appearance. They soon realized that Feng Kong performed this attack at the expense of his own life, preferring to sacrifice himself just for the sake of getting rid of Yi Shiwen. For a warrior, time was precious, and so was their desire to practice and get stronger. Xiantian masters had a lifespan of 200 years, while truth-level masters had a lifespan of 500 years. But even this much time was not enough, and experts needed to spend each and every second of their life to reach the ultimate success of stepping into the legendary level and become an immortal. Although concept of immortality was only stated in rumors, but since lifespan increased with each realm, so people believed that as long as they continued to practice, they would continue to live forever. So even a minute was very valuable for a warrior, let alone a peerless genius like Feng Kong must have spent so many years to reach his current level. He must have spent so much time, practicing crazily, but now, he was going to lay waste to everything he amassed so far. Finally, that incarnation of the ancient sword god waved his sword. This attack was so tremendous that the space was torn apart, the seawater instantly vaporized, and the terrifying swordki rushed surging towards Yi Shiwen. In front of this attack, Yi Shiwen appeared like an ant, waiting for divine retribution. Yi Shiwen's heart was beating rapidly, preparing him for the upcoming catastrophe, but he had no other choice. He immediately rushed forward and struck his sword, releasing an enormous sword intention towards the incoming attack. Boom! 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 Every collision between Yi Shiwen and the ancient sword god would produce countless air explosions, setting off waves of storm in all directions. Everyone was staring at the scene and thinking how insanely powerful Yi Shiwen actually was. Even while facing such a terrifying power technique, he was actually able to hold his own, and not just that, he also managed to carry on ceaseless counterattacks. There was a hint of blood oozing out of his mouth, but it seemed as if he was not feeling anything. After all, his opponent was burning out his own life energy for the sake of this attack, so when compared to this, losing small amount of blood was practically nothing. Yi Shiwen could feel that the attacks of this sword god were powerful enough to effortlessly slaughter ordinary experts. But as a result of practicing tyrant body technique, his body had become too strong, to the extent that even the incarnation of an ancient sword god was unable to seriously injure him, showing how ridiculously sturdy his body had become. Moreover, hidden inside the Tianyuan mirror, there was an unseen force that was secretly rendering some parts of the attack useless, otherwise, the injuries wouldn't be limited to just blood coming out of his mouth. It could be said that Yi Shiwen was the epitome of recklessness. Yi Shiwen was holding his own all this time, in fact, now, both sides were trying to hold on. Just the way Feng Kong wanted for Yi Shiwen to exhaust all his energy, now, Yi Shiwen was waiting for him to exhaust himself to death. Yi Shiwen came up with an efficient form of counterattack, a quick fix, in this situation. Immediately, he mobilized Jin Yuan throughout his body and enveloped himself in a protective layer of sword intention, so he was no longer affected by this terrifying coercion. The sword god's coercion was just like Tianyuan mirror's coercion, which was capable of suppressing devils. Yi Shiwen's motive was to envelop himself in the profound sword intention in order to counter the severe coercion of the sword god. You must die. Feng Kong coughed out a mouthful of blood, half of his hair had already turned white, while at this time, the sword god suddenly waved his huge sword, hurling endless swordki towards Yi Shiwen. The swordki spread out in the sky like bright stars, combined into a single entity like a huge tide of countless swords and set off waves of swordki towards Yi Shiwen. While facing these sword waves, Yi Shiwen suddenly had a feeling of suffocation. Sword waves came surging with enormous amounts of concentrated energy, accompanied by terrifying coercion. Each wave contained the supreme power of swordki, and even though Yi Shiwen possessed insanely strong body, he could hear his bones produce creaking sound. It was obvious that Feng Kong was going to the extremes, pushing the incarnation of sword god to go all out. He was determined to kill Yi Shiwen no matter what. This attack is so horrifying, no one can face this and survive. Feng Kong is indeed a peerless genius, we can see that from the level of attack he has performed just now. Unfortunately, his legend will die today because even if he manages to kill Yi Shiwen, judging from the overdrain of his life force, there's no way he will survive. Countless disciples were watching this battle and were totally amazed. Even from afar, they could sense the terrifying might of the sword god, but more amazing was the fact that Yi Shiwen was facing this head-on and was still alive. Yi Shiwen was not scared, he was aiming for a stronger counterattack. He clenched his teeth, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. Ahem. Finally, Feng Kong coughed out blood, and with a slight tremor, the large incarnation of sword god suddenly stalled. Ah! Yi Shiwen's sword intention suddenly began to get bigger and rushed into the sky, straight towards the sword god's incarnation. Puchi! In that moment, the whole body of sword god was cut in half by the endless barrage of sword attacks. At this time, the sword god's incarnation came tumbling down, turned into bits and pieces and scattered in the atmosphere. Poof! Feng Kong spat a mouthful of blood. He couldn't see what happened, but when he gained his senses back, a sword was already put through his chest. It was his own sword, snatched from his hands by Yi Shiwen a moment ago, and then put through his chest instantly. He was done for. His own sword was putting an end to his glorious life, as his blood was slowly trickling down the sword. His consciousness was gradually fading as he vaguely heard some words, echoing in his ears, and a vivid scene appeared in his mind. He was an orphan, his life was simply like a dog who didn't have food to feed himself. Then one day, he met his master, who helped him stand on his feet and made it possible for him to become famous as a peerless genius. He still couldn't forget the day he met his master, and the words he heard from him. Let us conquer the world and unify it under one flag, then we will make sure that the kind of pitiful life you had to lead, the same thing will never be repeated for anyone else. Boom! Feng Kong heavily fell down from the sky and his body slowly sank into the sea. At this time, at the place where Yi Shiwen was standing a moment ago, a dark figure suddenly appeared. He was a man, dressed in a black cloak, and horrifying dark aura was creeping out of his body like black snakes. The lightning was embroidered on his black cloak and was exuding a sense of danger, giving rise to a hint of terror in everyone's eyes. It was not hard to guess that this guy was a bad news. Thunder, don't you claim to be known as Great Yu State's deadliest assassin? How come you missed, and a youngster managed to dodge your kill? A voice, filled with mockery, resounded in the surroundings and a figure suddenly appeared from the void. It was none other than Lu Hongwei. Then, suddenly, a large group of Bai Majiao followers and several devils made an appearance. Yi Shiwen felt somewhat tight in his heart, so, Bai Majiao finally made a move. The disciples of the 5 major forces were looking around and appeared horrified. Apparently, they didn't know that Bai Majiao's raid was going to take place on Qianji Island during the competition. Standing at a distance, Qi Fifan frowned, but he seemed all prepared. In fact, there was a vague smile on his face. Thunder, isn't that Great Yu's deadliest assassin? A disciple exclaimed after realizing the identity of this cloaked man. Thunder was a legendary character and quite infamous in Great Yu State. No one knew who he was, where he came from. He just appeared 100 years ago out of nowhere, and suddenly, he became well known as the deadliest assassin of Great Yu. And it was said that he was associated with a famous assassins guild named End of the World Guild. End of the World Guild consisted of a deadly bunch of fierce men, who were willing to do almost anything as long as the reward was to their liking. They were daring enough to take up any job, regardless of the outcome. Regarding the unexpected appearance of Thunder, the best strategy would be to rely on the disciples of Yunqing City, considering the fact that they had a previous experience in dealing with Thunder. In the past, Thunder had made an assassination attempt on the Yunqing City Lord, thought he didn't succeed and was finally surrounded, but later, he managed to escape. After this incident, the news spread like forest fire throughout the Great Yu State and he slowly came to be known as Great Yu's deadliest assassin. Thunder was a legend. He was simply a legend of terror. This position was comparable to the position of Qi Fifan and other strongest true disciples, who were competing for the position of Yi Yuan School's head. It was said that from generation to generation, it was almost certain for Shuling sect's spiritual son to become the head of the main sect. Abominable human, I will chop you into 1,000 pieces. Deepwater Black Serpent King suddenly became furious. He hated humans the most and wanted to slaughter them all, only then the demon beasts would be able to occupy the land. Do you really think that you stand a chance? Today you have dared to participate in this kind of thing, and tomorrow, your whole family of deepwater black serpents would go extinct from East China Sea. Shuling Sect's spiritual son said quietly, and a strange smile appeared on his face, but provocation was deeply embedded in his tone. You deepwater black serpents are nothing but practice materials, waiting for the day your soul and blood is refined into immortality. Dan. Lu Hongwei, let me deal with this spiritual son of Shuling Sect. I want to kill everyone from Shuling Sect. Deepwater Black Serpent King said in an aggressive tone and was very angry at Shuling Sect's spiritual son. Yi Shiwen was silently watching all this and was a bit surprised. For the indifferent and serious type Deepwater Black Serpent King to become so furious at few provoking words of Shuling Sect's spiritual son was quite unexpected. He was so calm and composed a moment ago, but just few words were enough to expose his irascible nature. This was the legendary skill of using mockery for instigation. Enough talk, aren't we going to kill them all? Thunder said impatiently. You insolent freak, 10 years ago, you tried to break into the palace to assassinate His Majesty. Today, I will definitely arrest you and bring you to justice. Prince Rui suddenly thundered loudly and sprang toward Thunder, and simultaneously shot his palm, releasing endless burst of thunders. Prince Rui's main power was utilizing the large-scale cooperation of martial arts on the battlefield, but Thunder was better at the art of assassination, but still, the clash between these two martial artists was earth-shattering. They were at same level and equally experienced, so the aftermath of their battle was obviously going to be terrifying. As the two clashed, several Xiantian-level disciples and Bai Majiao followers were blasted away. Chapter 197 Fierce Battle with Devils. The whole scene was chaotic. All of the disciples of 5 forces and followers of Bai Majiao were engaged in a large-scale battle, while some disciples were dealing with demon beasts in seawater. Qi Fifan and Lu Hongwei were battling in the mid-air, and whenever they clashed, it seemed as if the sky itself would split open. A terrifying battle was taking place between bloodthirsty Deepwater Black Serpent King and the spiritual son of Shuling Sect in the sea. From the intensity of this battle, it seemed like the entire sea would vaporize from the amount of energy being released in their attacks. Battle cries could be heard throughout Qinji Island. Both sides were fierce and no one was willing to show any mercy to the enemies. After harboring hatred for so many decades, now, there was no use of superfluous words. Whether it was the sky, the ground, or the sea, all turned into battlefields. Corpses were falling down from the sky, fresh blood changed the color of seawater. It was a rare sight where so many truth-level experts were dying in battle. However, this time, the 5 major forces of Great Yu State, who were never on good terms with each other, had finally joined forces to deal with a common enemy. Yi Shiwen also stepped into the battlefield and began slaughtering the followers of Bai Majiao. Although he was aware of the fact that they could not determine the final outcome of this battle. The final outcome would entirely depend on Qi Fifan, Shuling Sect's spiritual son, and Prince Rui. Yi Shiwen continued to advance while killing several enemies along the way. He didn't know how many people had already died since the raid started, and several Yi Yuan School's disciples were gathered inside the protection barrier, especially those who were too fragile for this level of war. Boom! A horrifying aura rushed from far away, and along with it, a distant figure instantly flew over towards them. It was actually a half-step legendary devil. His devil wings were fluttering behind his back, and each and every thump of his wings were setting off terrifying storms, accompanied by the loud sound of thunderclaps. The faces of all disciples suddenly paled, because they knew that the situation on war had now changed with the unexpected appearance of yet another half-step legendary expert. Moreover, devil experts were inherently fiercer than humans experts. You petty humans, sooner or later, you are all going to be ruled by the devil race. That fearful devil expert said in a loud echoing voice. What do we do now? We do not have another half-step legendary expert. Don't tell me this is the end of us. Human beings are just bags of fresh blood, they are the practice resources who are born just to be killed by us devils someday. The peerless devil expert said in a domineering voice. Correct, you are nothing but a bunch of ants. A crazy laughter was heard by everyone, as a rampant specter suddenly appeared. It was a young devil expert, his body was exuding tyrannical breath, and the souls of several disciples, who were present in his vicinity, were instantly crushed by his presence itself. You are called Yishuan, right? I just saw your battle, you are pretty good. As long as you kneel down and swear allegiance to me, I am willing to take you up as my slave. I'll spare your life and take you with me as a war slave. He rushed all the way towards Yishuan. The human warriors who tried to stop him were all slaughtered by him, and he used a devil power technique to quickly absorb their blood and essence to increase his cultivation level. Keep me as a slave. Yishuan sneered, and sword intention instantly congealed around his sword, it was rotating violently and producing a buzzing sound. You are just a human, and Zhenwu Jie would eventually be ruled by devil race, in fact, the whole 10,000 worlds community will be ruled by us. Compared to all that, you are just a tiny existence. The young devil expert sneered, once these experts are killed, the rest of humanity is nothing but a herd of docile sheep. Everyone was immediately infuriated by his words, because irrespective of which force they belonged to, in the end, they had the common identity of human beings. To be dismissed as slaves, as fresh blood, by the devils would obviously make them angry. I have been in this world for few years but haven't seen a fierce expert like you. You are good, and being a devil prince, I must say that I acknowledge you. So as long as you are willing to surrender to me, that 8th prince, who has challenged you, won't be your match. I will give you supreme devil power techniques, which will make you a superior warrior, and killing 8th prince won't be a tough task for you anymore. The young devil expert said, and it appeared like he really looked down on the 8th prince. Well, you may have been here for few years, but I have been here my entire life, and I have met several excellent human experts, so you better mind your tongue. Yishuan disdainfully said. Humans are weak, nothing but ants in front of us. After I kill you, I will kill other experts from younger generation one by one, including that 8th prince. I hear, you all are considered as the pride of human race, I will turn you all into my slaves, and those who refuse will die. The young devil expert said. Devil, I will be the first to take you on. Chief Yifan shouted, and his extraordinary aura spread wantonly in the midair. He was in front of 2 half-step legendary experts, Lu Hongwei and that devil expert, but he wasn't worried at all. Rubbish, a petty human like you cannot possibly stand a chance against me. The devil expert proudly said. The strength of this devil prince was indeed terrifying, but Yishuan had a preliminary understanding that he was actually at the peak of small truth realm, which would make this stronger than Feng Kong. No wonder he was so proud of himself. An enormous blast was swept off around both of them, and none of the spectators dared to go close because the aftermath of these collisions could easily kill them. Yishuan went back several steps and stopped, but before stopping, he again released a terrifying sword intention towards the devil prince. The devil prince immediately made a counterattack, and the 2 attacks collided in the sky, setting off surging waves in the sea. Boom! Both of them severely clashed. They used brute strength and collided into each other. A terrible wound appeared on Yishuan's body and his blood spattered. But Devil Prince's condition was much worse, because the sword intention directly ripped through his body, tearing off a terrible wound, much bleak and worse than Yishuan's wound. It was a terrible collision, the collision solely relying on brute strength. You dare to hurt me, you petty human, how dare you injure a noble devil prince? The devil prince was extremely furious and shouted in agony. Why did I hurt you? Well, you are a devil and want to turn me into your slave, that's why I cut you. Is that enough reason for you? Yishuan smirked and seemed unaffected by his wounds. You are courting death. No one can hurt me and escape. The devil prince's face revealed a cold look, he roared like a beast, and Machi quickly wrapped his body and also covered the deep wound caused by Yishuan's sword intention. Devils were much more resilient than human beings. His Machi began to condense and took the form of a ghostly skull. The skull flew into the sky, screaming and shrieking as if accusing the injustice of this world. There was a huge amount of resentment condensed in that skull. Devil Prince's eyes were blood red, full of killing intention, and keeping a close eye on Yi Shiwen. He wanted to slaughter Yi Shiwen in one fell swoop. He was really a killing machine. Chapter 198, Routed, Sky-Shattering Sword. The whole sky was torn off by the golden sword, and terrifying power contained in this attack instantly collapsed the joint attack from the other two half-step legendary experts. This was a terrifying sword attack, simply a masterpiece in its own league. Puchi. The sword attack opened a nasty wound in the body of that half-step legendary devil expert, his blood spattered all over and bone fragments scattered in the vicinity. The half-step legendary devil expert seemed in a terrible state. A moment ago, he had resorted to the supreme devil magical powers, but still could not stop Qi Fifen's sword attack. The power contained in that sword attack was far beyond his imagination, as if the whole universe was still ringing due to its outbreak. Qi Fifen's sword skill was something to be scared of. No wonder he looked so confident, even while facing two half-step legendary experts. That devil's wound was healing slowly, but the terror in his heart had still not disappeared. Just how could a human be so terrifying? The frustration was making him mad. He was depressed because he came to this world thinking he was a predator, but in front of this human expert, he ended up being the hunt instead. And, in addition to that, this human expert was so incredible that he was single-handedly overwhelming two half-step legendary experts. Even Lu Hongwei had a terrified look on his face, and a contemptuous look in his eyes, because even though he was considered a genius in the younger generation of Bai Majiao, he was basically nothing in front of Qi Fifen. Now that you have come today, then don't even think about going now. Qi Fifen chuckled loudly. This place is quite beautiful and suitable to be turned into a cemetery for you lot. Qi Fifen once again waved his sword. The golden aura around his body was making him look like a golden god of war, and this time, the sword attack was simply invincible and even more terrifying than the last one. Like a stream of falling stars, the sword attack directly fell towards Lu Hongwei and the devil expert. They tried to block the attack. There was an incomparably terrified look in Lu Hongwei's eyes, and he was kind of angry himself for looking down on Qi Fifen. He had fought with the strongest true disciples of Yi Yuan school in the past, except Qi Fifen, because back then, he was only a young junior. But now, Lu Hongwei finally came to know about the horrifying strength of Yi Yuan school's mythical disciple. Qi Fifen was just like a myth. He himself was at half-step legendary level but still managed to overwhelm two experts of same level. At this time, Qi Fifen's extraordinary and outrageous aura swept off. Ah! Their joint defense was instantly broken down by Qi Fifen's attack. Both experts suddenly began to scream pitifully as their entire wrists had been cut down and oozing out a fountain of blood. All of the people gasped at this scene, since all of the three experts were at half-step legendary realm, but the gap between Qi Fifen and the other two was too big. Human experts suddenly burst into cheers because Qi Fifen's extraordinary strength had given them immense confidence. What a fearful human, but he must die, otherwise he will pose a huge threat for my people. An intention to kill appeared in the devil expert's eyes. Qi Fifen looked coldly at him. His eyes were exuding golden rays of light. It seemed as if his whole body was made up of gold, just like the golden avatar of an ancient god of war. Today, all of you devils are going to die, so I would like you all to stay here. Qi Fifen said in a mocking tone, and a Jin method suddenly appeared in the surroundings. An endless sword ki surged out and started flying in all directions. Several Bai Majiao followers and devils were caught off guard and died. This is a trap. Lu Hongwei and the devil experts suddenly exclaimed. They finally realized that their plan had actually leaked, but they didn't have time to find the traitor, because right now, their main focus was on getting out of this trap. Hurry up and withdraw. Lu Hongwei shouted loudly. Since their plan had been seen through by the enemy, so there was no meaning in continuing the raid. Immediately, devils and followers of Bai Majiao began to retreat. Even Deepwater Black Serpent King ordered his forces of demon beasts to withdraw. Thunder and Deepwater Black Serpent King also left their respective battles and escaped. But at this time, Qi Fifan shot once again and released a barrage of sword shadows which instantly rushed towards the escaping Lu Hongwei and devil expert. On the ground, Yi Shuwen sneered and looked at the devil prince whose aura had already risen to the extreme. There was a knife-like sharp look in his eyes. Although now he was in danger but he didn't seem to care, he was keeping a close eye on Yi Shuwen and it seemed like he won't leave before killing Yi Shuwen. Today you must die. The devil prince shouted and released an extremely frightening aura in the surroundings. Now that the situation is reversed, won't you run away? Yi Shuwen coldly stared at the devil prince. Although he said these words, but even if devil prince decided to escape, he would chase him and kill him. Yi Shuwen suddenly released his Jin Yuan, which was released like the terrifying sea of clouds and a section of it transformed into a coiling dragon. Yi Shuwen's imposing aura was not one bit inferior to that of the devil prince. One must know that Yi Shuwen possessed dragon qi that had a natural restraining effect on devils. Dragon qi gave him an overwhelming advantage over devils, but devil prince's ma qi also couldn't be taken lightly. After all, he possessed noble devil blood. After all, they always believed that devils was terrible creatures and much more fiercer than human beings, but today's battles completely changed their outlook. Right in front of their eyes, Qi Fifan defeated two half-step experts, one of whom was a real devil. And after that, they saw Yi Shuwen, an expert of truth 3rd stage, defeating a devil prince who was at small truth level. Yi Shuwen's battle really inspired many disciples and boosted their confidence, making them believe that even they could fight and win against devils. Now they understood that devils were not some invincible creatures, that even they could be defeated and killed. As the smoke completely dispersed, Yi Shuwen's figure became visible to everyone. Although there was a serious wound across his waist and there was blood all over his body, but there was a calm and composed look on his face. I cannot die. Devil Prince managed to give one last shout before his eyes gradually lost the light. He had the ambition to rule 10,000 worlds, and look down on human beings, but in the end, he died here, and that too at the hands of a human being. Just because you were born as a devil doesn't mean that you are stronger than humans. Anyone can become strong if they have the will for it. You just belong to a group of savage beasts, that's all. A cold smile appeared on Yi Shuwen's face as he said these words. Chapter 199, Obstruct Promotion, Court Death. The battle at Qianji Island ended up in the victory of the 5 coalition forces. Bai Majiao's raid was nullified in one fell swoop, as if getting rid of epidemic, and there were numerous casualties in coalition forces of devils and demon beasts. That half-step legendary devil expert was chased by Qi Fifan and was finally slaughtered. Lu Hongwei managed to escape with serious injuries. Thunder and Deepwater Black Serpent King were also wounded but managed to escape. This could be said as a harsh blow to the arrogance of Bai Majiao and devils. In this battle, 2 men made legends for the entire world to wonder upon. One was the invincible expert who actually single-handedly overwhelmed 2 half-step legendary experts. This was none other than the mythical disciple of Yi Yuan School, well known as Qi Fifan. After this battle, one more legend was added to the huge list of his legends, sending sensation throughout the Great Yu State. The other was a newly emerging genius named Yi Shuwen. His name spread throughout the Great Yu State and he became an overnight sensation. Initially, his fame was limited within the boundaries of Yi Yuan School and few other places, but now, the legend of his achievements completely spread, reaching the far corners of Great Yu State. He defeated the commander-in-chief of Imperial Guards, Feng Kong, and a devil prince back-to-back. The details of these 2 stunning battles quickly spread throughout the Great Yu State through the mouths of the disciples from the 5 forces. The rumor about Yi Shuwen receiving the challenge to a duel from 8th Prince, the strongest in the younger generation of disciples, also spread. Soon, Yi Shuwen became a well-known figure to everybody. In a blink of an eye, 10 days passed since the Bai Majiao raid on Qianji Island. Yi Shuwen slowly opened his eyes in a small courtyard. It took 10 days for him to completely heal the injuries he received from those 2 battles. He fought 2 experts back-to-back and none of the 2 were ordinary experts, especially that devil prince. The good thing was that he received only flesh wound which contained mainly ma qi. It was extremely difficult and took him long time to first refine then consume Devil Prince's concentrated mochi. With the help of Tianyuan mirror, Yishuan managed to extract mochi out of his wounds. Otherwise, for an ordinary expert, even if they somehow managed to survive, they would at least have to spend a year or two to heal up. But Yishuan also gained a lot from these two battles. He had to quickly increase the comprehension speed of martial arts in the mysterious space, although his accumulation was still not enough and it should take long time for the accumulation to reach breakthrough level for the truth 4th stage. Although he rested for 10 days, but it was not in vain. After all, this was the first time he seriously felt the unimaginable gap between himself and some of the country's top experts. Despite being on half-step legendary realm, Qi Fifan was simply invincible and heroic, not to mention he was much more stronger than those old guys at the same level. Initially, Yishuan had become somewhat arrogant, but after witnessing this war, he finally had a realization that he was not strong enough. Well, it's time to go back to Yi Yuan school, Yishuan said with a smile. Now, he could go back and get promoted to the rank of a true disciple. Right now, he was officially an inner disciple and there was simply a gap of heaven and earth between an inner disciple and true disciple. I wonder how Brother Qi can possess such kind of strength, Yishuan said with a sigh. Qi Fifan is actually at a level way beyond the half-step legendary realm. Yimo said, he must be practicing some power technique that doesn't let his breakthrough, hence he can have a strong accumulation of power, and once he had a breakthrough, he will immediately reach a higher stage of legendary realm. Don't tell me you actually believe that a half-step legendary expert can beat the crap out of 2 half-step legendary experts at once? It is obvious that Qi Fifan has obtained some extraordinary treasure. I don't know what kind of treasure you are hiding, but I can tell this much that 8th Prince will never be a match of Qi Fifan. Yimo said, so if you want to compete for the title of Yi Yuan School's head, Qi Fifan is most likely going to be your biggest rival. I'm not interested. Yishuan shook his head and said. By this time, all of the disciples had returned to their respective sets, only Yishuan stayed back to heal. Yishuan opened his devil wings and flew at a lightning speed, straight in the direction of Yi Yuan School. He was much more faster and stronger than experts of Truth 3rd stage, because his battle strength was comparable to small Truth level experts. Only within an hour, he arrived at Yi Yuan School, all thanks to the incredible speed granted by his devil wings. Next, the most urgent task for him was to go to Merit Palace and change his identity from an inner to true disciple. Yishuan quickly went into the Merit Palace. There were many people inside the Merit Palace, some were exchanging demon cores for credits and some were exchanging credits for spirit stones. Yishuan walked all the way and arrived in front of the Merit Elder, responsible for overseeing the smooth operation of Merit Palace. Everyone looked strangely at Yishuan, although Merit Elder was responsible for the functioning of Merit Palace, but there were several low-tier elders for the job. No one dared to disturb the Merit Elder for such matters. Yishuan, what are you doing? The elder said in a somewhat rude manner and looked at Yishuan with his sharp gaze. Several disciples were suddenly startled because they never thought that this young man was actually the famous Yishuan. Although Yishuan's name was well known but not many people knew his appearance. When they finally knew that this young man was Yishuan, they were suddenly excited. One must know that Yishuan had now become a legendary figure and also the idol of younger generation of Yi Yuan School. Yishuan was surprised for a moment, he did not think before that he would bump into Elder Jin Xian, a supporter of Luo clan. But, since the other party didn't seem to give him face, he would naturally not care about giving respect to the elders. Yishuan indifferently replied, I have come to get promotion. Do you qualify? Jin Xian looked coldly at Yishuan and said. Isn't that your job to find out whether I qualify or not? Yishuan sneered, he knew that Jin Xian was intentionally embarrassing him. I say, you do not qualify. Jin Xian coldly said. Presumptuous, you're just a little merit elder and still dare to arbitrarily decide this kind of thing? Yishuan snorted and loudly said. The promotion of a disciple to the rank of a true disciple was always a major event for entire Yi Yuan School. Although there were hundreds of true disciples in the sect, but this number was the result of hundreds of years of accumulation. And the strength of each true disciple added up to the entire prosperity of Yi Yuan school. Once the merit elder was requested by a disciple for the promotion, he must immediately report to the elders' council and help him get the promotion. Yi Xuan was simply not afraid of him, although elders held high authority in the sect, but it was only on par with the status of true disciples. In fact, true disciples were much more valuable than the elders, considering that the true disciples represented the hope of martial arts in the sect. They would someday hold the status of a peak head, higher position in the sect, and even the position of sect head was available to the strongest true disciple. And only those who couldn't hold such prestigious positions would one day end up as the elder of the sect. Insolent brat, you dare to talk disrespectfully to an elder, do you want to be punished? Jin Xian coldly stared at Yi Xuan and shouted. There was an undisguised killing intention in his eyes. Although he heard the news that Yi Xuan had become insanely powerful, but he didn't believe it. Disrespecting an elder is a big sin, I'll destroy your cultivation. Jin Xian said, and a cruel smile appeared on his face. He instantly shot his palm, and a huge hand, congealed out of Zhen Yuan, went towards Yi Xuan. Although he was confident, but he was being careful because he thought that Yi Xuan possessed strength comparable to true disciples. Damn you! Yi Xuan immediately became furious, the killing intention surged out of his body and Zhen Yuan instantly enveloped his body, like waves of energy, rotating in circular path around his body, with him at the center. Suddenly, the roar of a dragon echoed in the Merit Palace, and a coiling dragon appeared out of nowhere and collided with the big hand of Jin Xian. In an instant, Jin Xian's big hand, made up of Zhen Yuan, was crushed by the coiling dragon. You're bold, but don't you know that the punishment for raising hand on an elder is death? Jin Xian said in a strict manner, but there was no way he could hide the terrified look in his eyes. How could Yi Xuan be so powerful? Only 2 months ago, he was not so powerful and he could have easily killed Yi Xuan if Lin Zhantian had not interfered, but now, his attack was so easily blocked. Chapter 200, Behind the scenes. At this time, Jin Xian shot the most powerful attack in the form of horrifying Zhen Yuan, surging towards Yi Xuan. The whole Merit Palace had begun to boil. Don't be so full of yourself. Yi Xuan sneered and struck with his dragon claw, instantly forming a whirlwind of dragon qi. Boom! In just a flash, Jin Xian's attack was pulverized and the terrifying force present in Yi Xuan's attack fiercely crashed into Jin Xian and sent his body spinning, which then severely crashed on a pillar and came crumbling down. Standing on the side, several disciples were stunned when they saw this scene. In just one move, Yi Xuan effortlessly defeated Elder Jin Xian, as if it was nothing. Truth-level power, Brother Yi is really a truth-level expert, as the rumors said. Yes, truth-level disciples hold high status, even elders do not dare to bully them. But this Yi Xuan is so arrogant, he dared to raise hands on an elder. What elder? This elder is audacious, hasn't he heard of Brother Ye's famous deeds? Even the commander-in-chief of Imperial Guards died in his hands. He is certainly a highly cultured super genius of martial arts, but Jin Xian dares to obstruct Brother Ye's promotion, he is basically courting death. A disciple sneered, this thing must be reported top elders council, so that from now on, no one dares to offend Brother Yi. God, this Yi Xuan's strength progresses too fast, I know because I joined Qianyu faction. Last time I saw him, he was not this much strong. A weakling like you wants to obstruct my promotion? Yi Xuan sneered and looked at Jin Xian, who was miserably groaning on the ground. This was really the biggest mistake of his life. He shouldn't have obstructed Yi Xuan's promotion. Since the disciples, who got promoted to the true disciple rank, weren't generally so strong. They usually were on truth first or second stage and couldn't possibly be Jin Xian's opponents, but the same case didn't apply on Yi Xuan. Yi Xuan, stop! At this time, a hoarse voice resounded in the Merit Palace. Yi Xuan turned around and saw an old man in purple, and right now, there was a sort of smile on his face. Someone had informed the Penalty Palace about this conflict and an elder came to mediate. Elders from Penalty Palace were usually strong enough to be able to mediate conflicts between rebellious powerhouses. Yishuan recognized the pattern on this old man's clothes and found out that he was not just any elder from Penalty Palace, but he was actually the Lord of Penalty Palace. He held one of the strongest positions in Yuan school, right under sect head and the peak leaders. Even high-level true disciples were afraid of him, because he was never lenient when it came to punishments. Greetings to penal elder. Yishuan cupped his hands and respectfully said. Penal elder saw the respectful look on Yishuan's face and nodded with a somewhat satisfied smile. He was informed that Yishuan was arrogant, despotic and very rebellious, but now when he met Yishuan in person, he appeared very humble. But he did not know that Yishuan was simply not a humble person. Yishuan followed the simply rule of tit for tat. He was the type who would return whatever was given to him tenfolds, whether it was respect or disrespect. Yishuan's attitude towards people was completely determined by the attitude of the other side towards him. So Yishuan's enemies would often feel that Yishuan was very arrogant and despotic, while his friends would often feel that Yishuan was someone they could get along with very well. Yishuan believed that harmony between people was possible only if there was respect for each other. If people would give him face, he would also give them face, but if anyone would try to hurt him then he would certainly not show any mercy. What's going on here? Penal elder asked strictly, but there was no ill intent present in his voice. Yishuan immediately calmed down when he realized that the other party was not actually his enemy. He could sense the aura of penal elder and found out that he was half-step legendary expert and his strength was second to only each of the peak leaders and the sect head. This Jin Xian has some ulterior motive, I don't know for whom he is working for, but he just now tried to obstruct my advancement to the rank of a true disciple. Yishuan quietly explained. A smile appeared on the penal elder's face. This Yishuan was really a straightforward guy and didn't hesitate to use brute force whenever he was facing injustice. In any case, Jin Xian was an elder of Yuan school, but he tried to suppress a truth-level disciple, which was not something an elder should do. He was the culprit in this case and must be punished. Well indeed, Jin Xian is really quite audacious. But don't you worry, I will investigate this matter thoroughly and make sure he is punished. Penal elder immediately began implementing his powers as the Lord of Penalty Palace, because as long as there was violation of regulations, he was eligible to intervene. But was also secretly speechless at the authority of penal elder, though Jin Xian was at wrong in this case, but to be able to arrest an elder so easily, this really showed his supreme authority in Yuan school. And one must not forget that Jin Xian was associated with influential Luo clan, so this also showed that penal elder was not at all bothered to give face to Luo clan. I heard about your achievements in Qianji Island, your actions have boosted the prestige of Yuan school. Since your cultivation is already at truth 3rd stage, so there won't be any problem in give you promotion. Penal elder said. I will report it to the elders council, and soon, you will become a true disciple. A mountain peak will be exclusively prepared for you as well. When Jin Xian was taken into custody by Penalty Palace, it set off huge commotion in Yuan school, and immediately, elders' conference was organized to discuss about this matter. Yishuan is too much, he actually beat up a merit elder, how dare he look down on the sect. Tian Wushuang roared and seemed very angry, which was understandable because he was the Lord of Merit Palace and what Yishuan did was simply like a great insult to him. Wu Patian, the head of Yuan school, was sitting on the main seat and addressing to the conference. There was a solemn look on his face and no one knew what he was thinking. This thing went really out of hand, especially because Yishuan is involved in it. We all know about his achievements and his importance for our sect, so the matter regarding his promotion to the rank of true disciple must be reported to Elders' Council and should be done properly. It should be very clear that true disciples hold utmost importance in our sect. I don't need to repeat myself over and over, you all already know what I am trying to say. Penal elder said in a strong tone. Several elders nodded. There had been many disputes in Yuan school, despite the strict regulation by penal code. In fact, it was all to encourage competition among each other for the growth of all, but only few people actually involved in friendly matches and maintained peace. It was simply impossible for everyone to maintain such friendly attitude because people usually held ulterior motives, and forget about disciples. Even some of the elders had their own selfish reasons, so expecting everyone to be selfless was basically impossible. So long as the dispute was still within the scope of control, they could try to calm things down. But the bottom line was that the future prosperity of Yi Yuan School was directly proportional to the number of true disciples. It would directly determine how this sect would perform in the next few hundred years, so no one should look down on such rare valuable treasures called true disciples. Jin Xian indeed did something that was strictly not allowed in Yi Yuan School. No wonder it alerted the Elders' Council and he was dragged away mercilessly by the penalty palace. And Jin Xian not only attempted to embarrass Yi Shiwen, he went one step ahead and attacked as well, which strictly violates the regulations of the sect. I even suspect that someone is pulling his strings. Penal Elder coldly said. The other elders didn't answer because none of them believed that Jin Xian had been ordered by someone to attack Yi Shiwen. Who would be so stupid to plan an attack on a war hero like Yi Shiwen? Everyone knew that Yi Shiwen single-handedly defeated a terrifying devil expert of small truth level. Even if right now, he was truth 3rd level, everyone had come to see him as someone comparable to 8th Prince. Jin Xian was merely at truth 3rd stage, so who would send him to attack Yi Shiwen? It was just like sending someone to their own death. So one thing was certain, that Jin Xian was not ordered by someone to humiliate and attack Yi Shiwen. When none of the elders said anything, Penal Elder continued, I find Jin Xian as guilty in this matter and he must be punished. Chapter 201, 5th Prodisciple. If you do not punish him, then from here on, no one will obey the regulations of Yi Yuan School, especially when it comes to such fundamental rules. Penal Elder said. I think Jin Xian elders did not do it intentionally, he must have wanted to test the strength of Yi Shiwen. At this time, Tian Wushuang didn't know what to say in order to protect Jin Xian except to prove Jin Xian as a stupid person who was unaware of Yi Shiwen's strength and dared to get involved in such a matter. The most stupid kind of guy who just wanted to show off his strength in front of a junior. So you think that he is just a stupid guy who tried to test Yi Shiwen's strength? Who would believe such an excuse? Penal Elder said coldly, who doesn't know about the events that took place on Qianji Island? It was Yi Shiwen who provided accurate information and helped us avoid what could have been a very serious loss to our sect. And thanks to that vital information, we managed to wipe out the enemy forces of Bai Maojiao, and not just that, it also created a very good opportunity for Yi Yuan School to set up its reputation as an invincible force in front of the other major forces. In the future, no one would dare to look down on our younger generation. Now, everyone has seen the true talent of Yi Shiwen, but there's a chance that he may have some hidden strengths that we still haven't seen. Various forces have already recognized his strength, and in the future, he is likely to have a duel with the 8th Prince and the other top players of the younger generation. Our job should be to safeguard Yi Shiwen, the only hope of leading our younger generation in this race so that Yi Yuan School doesn't lose face in front of other sections. Penal Elder said. Although the other elders did not speak, but they clearly agreed with whatever Penal Elder said just now. Some of the elders wanted to object but they couldn't do it openly. But, objection was clearly visible in their eyes. Such a genius, there's no limit to the amount of care and support we must provide him with. We must not forget that after we old people are not there to protect the sect, we will have to rely on the younger generation to ensure the safety, security of Yi Yuan School. Only they will be able to maintain our sect's elaborate reputation and keep it going in the future. Penal Elder said and glanced at those elders who were showing signs of objection through their eyes. Everyone suddenly turned their faces sideways and looked at each other. After all, none of the elders participating in this meeting were at low rank. All of them held high positions and were extremely old, to the extent that most of them would not live another 100 years to look after the well-being of their sect. And how old was Yi Shiwen? He was merely about 20 years old and his cultivation would grant him a lifespan of about 400 years, which was an entire generation of life. Today, if they really offended such a peerless genius, then in the future, looking at Yi Shiwen's promising talent and unimaginable growth rate, perhaps, they might have to face serious consequences. By then, in their absence, Yi Shiwen would have surpassed them all, and even their successors might also have to face Yi Shiwen's wrath. Yi Shiwen had so much potential and talent that in the future, he would most likely become a peak leader, and later, he might even become the head of Yi Yuan School. Was it really worth to offend Yi Shiwen? After witnessing the recent events, now, no one would dare to underestimate Yi Shiwen, because they had come to realize that Yi Shiwen's talent was actually transcendent. They felt somewhat strange in their hearts, trying to figure out why was Penal Elder helping Yi Shiwen. They didn't know that Penal Elder was doing this to give a serious blow to Luo clan's influence, which would ultimately also affect Chu Jingsai's influence. Also, he wanted to tie a friendly knot between Huang Luochen and Yi Shiwen, because this would ultimately increase the influence of Huang Luochen. So long as one had enough common sense, one would not want to offend Yi Shiwen and certainly wouldn't try to make an enemy out of him. Penal Elder wanted to win over Yi Shiwen's trust and support for Huang Luochen. If Yi Shiwen agreed to join Huang Luochen's faction, then that would be a great addition and would certainly give a boost to his influence over other pro-disciples. And even if Yi Shiwen doesn't agree to join, after growing strong in the future, he would certainly support Huang Luochen, and would be just like icing on the cake. Yi Shiwen demonstrated endless potential, and no one could predict how strong he would become in the future. So it was for the best to not offend such a person, and an experienced old guy like him certainly understood such a basic point. Everyone looked at Wu Patian and waited for him to state the final judgment. Wu Patian, at this time, no longer looked indifferent. Instead he glanced at the crowd and said, Jin Xian will be stripped of his elder's identity and sent to guard the mines. That's my final decision. Suddenly, everyone was shocked in their hearts. Getting stripped of the identity of an elder, for Jin Xian, it was worse than dying. There were no small benefits for elders, which were especially necessary for later practice, because as the cultivation grew, more and more practice resources were required for further advancing to the next realm. After all, not everyone was daring like Yi Shiwen, who roamed about everywhere and plundered many resources whenever required. For most people, the resources granted by sect was the main source of strength and also the safest way. Without the resources granted by the sect, Jin Xian's further practice would be extremely difficult, and considering his almost finished lifespan, it was a very serious punishment. But since the head had already made a decision, including Tian Wushuang, no one dared to refute. One more thing, Yi Zaihui needs to be immediately promoted to the rank of other 4 pro-disciples. Wu Potian's next sentence suddenly startled all of the elders, because everybody expected him to be promoted to the rank of true disciples. Whether it was strength or credit, Yi Zaiwen had more than enough. Yi Shiwen indeed deserved to be promoted to a true disciple. But to be placed among the 4 strongest true disciples was simply unexpected for everyone. It could be said that although there were hundreds of true disciples in Yi Yuan School, but only the most distinguished and peerless geniuses were allowed to be called as the pro-disciples, and only they were allowed to compete for the position of head. These pro-disciples held strength, prestige, and personal connections, making them much superior to other true disciples. Pro-disciples were considered elites even among the elites like true disciples. In the past 100 years, there were only 4 who managed to achieve this rank. But today, Wu Patian unexpectedly added Yi Shiwen to the same rank, which suggested that Yi Zaiwen would have such an elaborate and promising future that his success might be comparable with that of the 4 pro-disciples. The last time when Wu Patian made such a judgment, Qi Fifan had an extraordinary rise in both fame and strength. At that time, no one expected that Qi Fifan would become such a legendary expert in the future, but Wu Patian was able to make a correct judgment about him. This was the second time Wu Patian made such a judgment, so did it mean that Yi Shiwen would become a possible future rival for Qi Fifan? But while they were extremely dismayed, no one dared to question Wu Potian's decision. Yi Yuan School's inheritance was an accumulation of so many years, and they certainly focused on cultivating geniuses. As long as they could nurture a true genius, the sect was willing to devote a lot of resources for it. This was also one of the main reasons how Yi Yuan School was able to stand tall for so many years. I hope everyone is aware of the declaration of duel to Yi Shiwen from the 8th prince. Wu Patian looked at the crowd and asked. N. Everyone nodded. This duel will be cancelled, no matter what happens, it must be cancelled. Wu Padian said, Yishuan's practice time is still short, this duel will be scheduled to some other time, when he is sufficiently strong to be able to deal with 8th Prince and the others. Yishuan is the new backbone of the younger generation of Yi Yuan school, we cannot afford to lose him. All of the elders nodded because they too agreed with Wu Potian's idea. After all, expect Yishuan, no of the other disciples lived up to the expectations. One must know that Luo Yifan was considered the leader of younger generation in Yi Yuan school and he was nothing compared to the 8th prince. The gap between them was extremely big, but Yishuan rose up as a new ray of hope for Yi Yuan school. While dealing with an evildoer, let evildoer do the job. Thinking about it, when Chief Fifan rose to fame, none of the other major forces was able to put forth a strong rival for him, making them utterly depressed. In fact, a lot of people said that perhaps, Chief Fifan took birth in the wrong era, he should have taken birth in the era of 8th Prince, then Yi Yuan school wouldn't have to face such embarrassment. In the recent years, Yi Yuan school couldn't produce a competent rival for the 8th Prince, but now, finally, Yishuan came into picture, showing the ability to compete with 8th Prince and the other top players in same generation. It would generally take a lot of time and resources to nurture a peerless genius, but now, with the unexpected rise of Yishuan, they would certainly not let him die early. Yi Yuan school had sufficient grounds to protect Yishuan. Quite simple, Yishuan was significantly younger than 8th Prince, so he must be allowed to train for 10 more years, then he would have the ability to compete with the 8th Prince. Unconsciously, they were all very confident of Yishuan. After all, despite being so young, if he was able to kill Feng Kong, the commander-in-chief of Imperial Guards, then in the next 10 years, people believed that he would at least catch up with 8th Prince and the others. Everyone wanted him to defeat the 8th Prince. If the 8th Prince doesn't stop, then I will personally go into action and protect Yishuan. Wu Padian said in a cold voice. Chapter 202, Qianyu Peak. The news about Yishuan's promotion to a prodisciple stirred things up in Yi Yuan school. Everyone was waiting to learn about what happened with Jin Xian, but they never expected such an outcome. The news spread like wild forest fire that elder Jin Xian was deprived of his elder's identity and sent to guard a mine, whereas Yishuan was promoted to the rank of a true disciple, which was an obvious result. But gaining the rank of a prodisciple shocked everyone. Of course, this time, the value of a merit elder faded away in front of Yishuan, the long-awaited priceless star of the sect. But everyone was surprised to find out the head himself promoted Yishuan to the rank of prodisciple. The same thing happened once before with Chief Fifan. He took the place of 4th prodisciple and he later became a legend in Yi Yuan school. And now, after Chief Fifan, Yishuan took the 5th place. Last time, just when Chief Fifan had become a prodisciple, there was a sudden growth in his popularity, there was also a sudden rise of his faction, both in terms of strength and size, and thanks to that, his followers had also received great advantages. So now it seemed like Yishuan would also have a similar rise like Chief Fifan had, and many people wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. After all, anyone would want to wash hands in a flowing river. This Yishuan is really too incredible. The elder Jin Xian was not only beaten by him but was also deprived of his elder's identity. Well, of course, Yishuan has become the 5th prodisciple, whereas, Jin Xian is merely an ordinary elder. There's no comparison between the two. I tell you, this Yishuan is simply a legend, a myth, and now with the rise in his status, the disciples of Qianyu faction will have a meteoric rise in strength and status. It's no longer the faction of newbies, because now, it belongs to a prodisciple. Unfortunately, I did not join early, and even if I go now and join Qianyu faction, I am afraid I won't be able to get the higher ranks. Yes, even the head said that he is personally going to protect Yishuan. I was worried that Yishuan might be killed by the 8th Prince, but now I am assured that within the protection of our head, even if the 8th Prince dares to come, he will meet his tragic end. Everyone was discussing about Yishuan. But for Yishuan, the most important thing was to receive control of Ophi's peak from the sect. It was a tall mountain and it seemed as if the peak of this mountain was floating in the sky. Without taking much time, Yishuan named it Qianyu Peak. Anyway, he had decided the name long ago, so he didn't spend much time while naming it. And afterwards, Qianyu Peak would become the permanent residence of Qianyu faction and all of the disciples of Qianyu faction would over there to live. Not to mention, the size of Qianyu Peak was more than enough to accommodate thousands of people. But as of now, there were few hundred disciples in Qianyu faction and accommodating them should not be a big deal. Not to mention, most of the disciples still lived in their respective 10 peaks, so basically, not even 100 disciples were going to live on Qianyu Peak. It was a great news for Qianyu disciples because their leader, Yi Shiwen, not only became a true disciple, he also became a pro-disciple with only 4 other at the same rank. There was a heaven and earth's difference between an ordinary true disciple and a pro-disciple. Yi Shiwen took control of Qianyu Peak from an elder, and the first thing he did was to give full access to Qianyu faction. This peak was already like a war fortress with several Jin methods for attack and defense, but they only activated in the most critical situations, and under normal circumstances, there was no way to activate these mechanisms. Yi Shiwen was not satisfied with the defense mechanisms and directly deployed the poisonous dragon water control flag array. Several deep-water black serpents congealed out of nowhere and completely surrounded the Qianyu Peak from all directions. It seemed as if the peak was being invaded by these serpents and the defense mechanisms immediately activated. But as suspected, these defense mechanisms were not satisfactory. However, Yi Shiwen's poisonous water dragon control flag array was enough to serve as a formidable defense for the Qianyu Peak. And most importantly, there was a spiritual artery buried on Qianyu Peak, although the Lingqi present was not generally sufficient, but since the flag array would be perennially buried in the spiritual artery, so over time, it would continue to enhance the quality of the flag. In fact, even Yi Shiwen couldn't make a guess about the rise in energy with the passage of time. Of course, if necessary, Yi Shiwen could come back at any time to protect Qianyu Peak. After Yi Shiwen acquired control of Qianyu Peak, it didn't take long for the news to spread throughout the sect, and soon many people, who were already interested in Yi Shiwen's strength and glory, discovered that right after he entered the Qianyu Peak, several deepwater black serpents came out of nowhere and surrounded the peak. They were roaring non-stop and their killing intention was crazily soaring in all directions. And since now the flag array was rooted into the spiritual artery of Qianyu Peak, it was able to display far more power when compared to how it used to perform in the hands of Yi Shiwen. What a terrifying killer Jin method! What kind of killer Jin method has Yi Shiwen buried in his peak? His killing method has taken over the sky itself, waiting to attack the prey. What is this killer Jin method? How come I've never seen it before? An elder said and looked at Yi Shiwen, who, at this time, was planting the poisonous dragon water control flag array into the spiritual artery. The gazes of many true disciples, elders and other powerhouses were glued to Yi Shiwen, and the reason was quite simple. They just wanted to learn more about the 5th pro-disciple of Yi Yuan school and would he be able to create legend like Qi Fifan. Immediately after Yi Shiwen was done burying the flag array, suddenly, Lingqi gushed out from Qianyu Peak and completely enveloped it in large stalks of surging Lingqi. Everyone looked at this scene with look of terror and shock in their eyes. What's going on? From where did all this Lingqi suddenly emerged onto the mountain peak? It seems like a Jin method which forcefully extracts Lingqi out of the spiritual artery and then seals it off. Yes, extravagant, and if this continues, soon, the huge concentration of Lingqi on the peak will eventually liquefy, but this way the spiritual artery will be consumed very fast and may get depleted within a century or so. What are you talking about? He has managed to extract Lingqi faster from the spiritual artery, the sect would definitely praise him for it. Yes, we should not forget that now he is a pro-disciple and owns superior treatment even when compared to true disciples. Most of the disciples were envious but were rather more shocked, because they did not know how Yi Shiwen managed to get his hands on so many top-level Jin methods. Including many of the true disciples, even the elders were in a state of shock, because in such a short time, Yi Shiwen managed to implement such a potent Jin method that it was basically sucking Lingqi out of millenniums old spiritual artery. From where did he grasp such a powerful Jin method? Such concentration of Lingqi was almost comparable to the Holy Lands of Yi Yuan school, which were formed only after many years of conservation. Although there would be a shocking consumption rate because of this, but in general, it would do more good than harm. Especially, a lot of forces were still holding hostility for Yi Shiwen, but now that they saw his performance with their own eyes, they came to realize that his capabilities were already far beyond their imagination and it was literally impossible to deal with him. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yi Shiwen, the fifth prodisciple of Yi Yuan School. Just now, I acquired a mountain peak of my own and named it Qianyu Peak. From hereby onwards, it is going to be the residence and headquarters of Qianyu faction. Later, if I find out that someone tried to aim their evil intentions towards Qianyu Peak or my people in my absence, I will make sure to obliterate your existence from this world. Yi Shiwen's voice burst out from Qianyu Peak and spread throughout Yi Yuan School like a storm. Everyone was secretly speechless after they discovered the depth of Yi Shiwen's skill. To be able to send his voice surging and trembling throughout the expanse of humongous Yi Yuan School was not something an ordinary true disciple could achieve. Just how unimaginably deep his skill actually was, and was he really a true third-stage true disciple? After listening to his overwhelming battle cry-like announcement, although many people still could not pinpoint his strength level, but at least now they understood why he was made a prodisciple by the head. Qianyu faction is really lucky. Having a prodisciple in the faction means their future prospects are simply unimaginable. Not to forget, disciples of Qianyu faction are going to live in a practice environment of Qianyu Peak, which is rich in lingqi, which is concentrated enough to be on the verge of liquefying. Only top-level elders, peak leaders and head of the sect are able to access such a kind of practice environment, but now it accessible to Qianyu faction. It's like they are going to get the same treatment as top elders and leaders of the sect. In such a short time, Yi Shiwen not only became a true disciple but also managed to obtain the title of a prodisciple. But looking at his qualifications, it will still take a lot of time for him to achieve the level of other four prodisciples. Yes, but you must consider the fact that other four prodisciples have been around for decades and almost a century, but in comparison, Yi Shiwen is just 20 years old and still became a prodisciple. But just think, he is just 20 years old and has a lifespan of 400 years. There are so many decades left for him to break through the heavens. With his talent and the kind of importance he holds for the sect, unless and until he doesn't end up dead in some conspiracy, I'm afraid his future prospects are extraordinary. Chapter 203, 1 Xiantian Dan. For each Yi Shiwen was busy day and night, implementing many Zhen methods taught by his in-house magic professor, Yi Mo. With all of the strategically implemented Zhen methods, the entire Qianyu Peak looked like paradise on earth, especially because of the planted heavenly treasures, all of which had matured overnight. There was a burst of herbal fragrance when the liquefied lingqi helped in quick production of herbs, which generally took 100 years or more than a millennium to fully mature. But right now, all of them were present in Yi Shiwen's medicinal garden. However, one must admit that the treatment of prodisciples in Yi Yuan School was simply unimaginably good. Even Yi Shiwen had not thought that he would actually be able to own a medicinal garden where he could grow heavenly treasures, not to mention he also obtained spiritual arteries buried under his peak. In fact, there were several herbal gardens in Yi Yuan School and prodisciples used to get an open supply of herbs from there, perennially. Of course, although prodisciples could take any herb from the garden, but there was a monthly limit, and if exceeded, they might have to purchase those herbs with spirit stones, but still, prodisciples always enjoyed preference over other disciples. My God, so many herbs have ripened overnight. You know, there are many of them that need several years to fully mature and some actually need several hundred years, but all of these matured overnight. Many disciples were stunned to witness such a scene. This outcome was possible because of endless supply of lingqi to the garden, which helped with the early ripening. After all, these herbs needed to absorb huge amounts of lingqi to fully mature, and under normal conditions, it would take several years to slowly accumulate so much lingqi from the atmosphere, but now that Yi Shiwen could provide them with endless support of lingqi, it accelerated the ripening speed. For a time, the entire Qianyu Peak was filled with herbal fragrance and was attracting the attention of everyone. Originally, Qianyu Peak was already a sacred ground with its own spiritual artery and medicinal garden, but now, with Yi Shiwen's interference, it had simply become the holy land for practicing martial arts. By this time, everyone had come to realize that Yi Shiwen was no ordinary existence, and knew extraordinary means that were simply unheard of, things that were never seen before. They did not know that more than half of these secret methods were taught to Yi Shiwen by Yi Mo, otherwise how could he possibly know about so many magical techniques? Although Yi Mo was just a spiritual being but was very wise and clearly knew about many magical techniques. After this night, Yi Shiwen's prestige soared to a whole new level, though still worse compared to the 4 pro-disciples, but it was clearly above ordinary true disciples. Many people had already seen through the potential of Yi Shiwen's plan. He had basically turned Qianyu Peak into a holy ground for practicing martial arts, and if a Houtian or Xiantian expert was to practice there, then it won't be a problem for them to cross the threshold and step into the next realm. To be able to break from Xiantian realm to Truth realm, this was a huge attraction for almost all Xiantian experts. To think about it, there were tens of thousands of core disciples, but there were only few hundred true disciples, and that too was the result of accumulation for several decades or centuries. On an average, only 1 out of several hundred core disciples managed to step into Truth realm, but by practicing on Qianyu Peak, one could experience an increase in success rate to a considerable extent. After all, the disciples of Qianyu faction would enjoy top-notch practice conditions which were accessible only to the top-level elders of Yi Yuan school. Yi Shiwen suddenly became an unsurpassable legendary figure in the hearts of all. After completion of arrangements on Qianyu Peak, Yi Shiwen summoned some of the top-level officials of Qianyu faction. In fact, he called Yi Feng and the others. "Brother, you're too much." Yi Rushue patted on the shoulder of Yi Shiwen and said with a pleased look on her face, "If we practice in such an environment, then it will be more effective, and in the future, we can hope to step into the Truth realm." Of course, the Truth realm is something that must be achieved by all. Yi Shiwen said, "And at this point, I'll help you." For Yi Shiwen, his family and friends were a very important part of his life, and by achieving Truth realm, an expert's lifespan could reach up to 400-500 years. Within the coming 2 centuries, his family members and friends would be dead if they didn't manage to step into Truth realm, so he must take measures now itself. Moreover, both Yi Rushue and Yi Feng were extremely talented, and even without Yi Shiwen's help, in the next couple of decades, they would naturally become the rare stars of Yi Yuan school, and as long as they wouldn't face any accident, reaching the Truth realm shouldn't be a problem. Not to mention, if they were to receive help from Yi Shiwen, then they would be able to achieve it faster and much more efficiently. And after becoming true disciples, they would certainly add up to Yi Shiwen's force as excellent allies and strong faction officials. Some people were really excited, although they had been called a genius by peers and elders, but the current situation was still very exciting for them all. After all, they were still too far from the Truth realm. Excluding a legendary evildoer like Yi Shiwen, who was simply an anomaly, according to their estimates, it would probably take 2 or 3 decades for them to step into the Truth realm, or maybe longer. But now, with Yi Shiwen's help in the form of endless practice resources and excellent practice environment of Qianyu Peak, there was no doubt that their cultivation would increase by leaps and bounds, and in a short time, they would definitely break through to the Truth realm. They were extremely excited because even if they were considered as genius newbies of Yi Yuan school, but there was still a huge gap between them and true disciples. Since now I have been promoted to the rank of a pro-disciple, there will certainly be a lot of people who want to join Qianyu faction. Yi Shiwen said in a calm manner, and everyone nodded. What he said was true, because earlier, he just held the enormous potential to step into the Truth realm, but now, he finally became a true disciple, and not just that, now he also held the title of 5th pro-disciple, so those who were still waiting to join would certainly not miss this opportunity. But what I mean to say is, that, we cannot recruit too many people. Our focus should be to recruit only elites. Yi Shiwen said, and basically meant that rather than turning Qianyu into a bulky faction like many other factions of true disciples, they must aim to become an elite faction by recruiting only elites. Those who are already a part of Qianyu faction will be called as original disciples, and the new ones, who want to join now, must fulfill the minimum requirement of being at Xiantian's 7th stage. I repeat, we only recruit people with great potential. Everyone nodded, because if before, a Xiantian 7th stage expert was willing to join Qianyu faction, they would be overjoyed, but now the situation was different. I know that we have a lot of Houtian level disciples in out factions compared to other factions. Yi Shiwen said with a smile, because the establishment of Qianyu faction was based on the new disciples. only 1/3 of these new disciples were in Xiantian realm, the remaining 2/3 were still in Hotian realm. Later in the last 1 year's time, 1/3 of them managed to step into Xiantian realm while remaining 1/3 were still at the peak of Hotian 9th stage. It would take more than a year for the rest of them to naturally step into the Xiantian realm. But Yi Xuan wanted to increase the overall strength of Qianyu faction in a short time, and since these new disciples represented the original strength of the faction when compared to new additions, so Yi Xuan wanted all of them to get stronger as fast as possible. His main motive was to help them step into the truth realm, and only by achieving this motive, Qianyu faction would become self-sufficient. So I intend to set up an alchemy furnace. Yi Xuan said, I am going to refine hundreds of Xiantian dawn for the members of Qianyu factions who are still in Hotian realm. I think that all of the members of our faction must be in Xiantian realm. Everyone was surprised for a moment. Yi Xuan was so generous, after all, even 100 Xiantian dan was not a small sum. Thinking about it, although these people were considered as geniuses in their previous respective subsects but still didn't have possessed Xiantian dawn, which was such an important item for having a successful breakthrough from Hotian to Xiantian realm, but now, Yi Xuan was going to openly refine and distribute Xiantian dawn among them. Now, it was like Xiantian dan was no different from vegetables and was being openly distributed in public interest so everyone could have one. Also, many people were curious to know how Yi Xuan managed to get his hands on the alchemical formula of Xiantian dan and what kind of method would he apply to refine hundreds of Xiantian dawn. They certainly did not know that for Yi Xuan, alchemy was not a difficult thing. He had already learnt many superior alchemy approaches and methods under the mentorship of Yi Mo. Yi Xuan was going to follow these much more efficient methods to refine Xiantian dawn in bulk, and by following Yi Mo's refining method, even the efficacy of these dawn would be much better than usual. In addition, I will be refining some of the He dawn as well, so the experts at Xiantian 5th stage can have the breakthrough and practice further into the subsequent stages of Xiantian realm. Yi Xuan said, then I will refining a lot of Ling dawn for everyone to use. Basically, from here on, the senior executives of Qianyu faction will be able to raise up their cultivation at an extremely fast rate. Of course, Yi Xuan was refining immortality pills at the perfection level by relying on superior alchemy techniques taught by Yi Mo, and when consumed, they would leave no after effects, hence allowing them to enhance the strength in shortest possible time. There were a lot of things that Yi Xuan personally could not do. After all, he was a pro-disciple and might have to deal with a lot of things, so he would have to greatly enhance the strength of the executives of Qianyu faction. Chapter 204, Sensation in Yi Yuan School. Yi Xuan finally decided to focus in alchemy and took out the huge alchemy tripod, seized from the crazy shark pirates, and began to work on it. By constantly practicing the art of alchemy in the mysterious space, he had already reached the pinnacle of this art, and now, he was way better at it than those other old alchemists. In fact, when considering the teachings of Yi Mo, his skills would be earth-shattering. There were many rumors spreading everywhere that Yi Xuan was able to refine many treasures whose formulae had been lost for several years. Although he knew alchemy and he also had a top-class alchemy furnace, but the most important thing was the amount of raw materials in his possession. Even if he had all the required infrastructure to produce something, he would still need enough raw materials. No matter what kind of immortality pill was to be produced, a lot of herbs were required along with huge supply of lingqi to carry out alchemical reactions. Now, there was no shortage of lingqi since there was endless supply of it in Qianyu Peak, and to such an extent that lingqi was getting liquefied on Qianyu Peak. This phenomenon was actually comparable to the spiritual shrine of Yi Yuan School. And now, thanks to endless supply of concentrated lingqi, Yi Xuan created a lush garden of medicinal herbs overnight. All of the fruits ripened and flowers bloomed overnight and the overall production was lavish. Basically, there would be no lack of herbs and medicine for Yi Xuan. The disciples of Qianyu faction were collecting the herbs from garden and taking them over to the place where alchemy furnace was placed. He was just sitting before the furnace and continuously casting alchemy techniques day and night to produce dawn. For the first few days, he was planning to refine only Xiantian dawn. It could be considered as the most simple prescription and he knew the secret process to refine it. Some medicinal herbs were required for refining Xiantian Dan, but Yishuan wasn't bothered since now he owned a medicinal garden where all kinds of herbs could be found and even new herbs could be grown within a matter of minutes. This was something only Yishuan could do, in fact, only he could afford to do so. Yishuan was able to refine few hundred Xiantian Dan in just one day's refining, and one must know that it's insane. Even the most veteran alchemists were able to refine a batch of 20 to 30 Xiantian Dan in one day, which was the reason why Dan were generally so expensive. With the help of so many Xiantian Dan, refined by Yishuan, many breakthroughs into Xiantian realm cropped up one after another on Qianyu Peak and spread huge torrents of auras on the peak. A month's time passed in a blink of an eye, and in this month, many of the disciples of Qianyu faction leveled up considerably. No one expected that these big movements would continue to occur for the whole month. First, the original members of Qianyu faction broke through from Hotian to Xiantian realm, and those who were already in Xiantian realm also stepped into further stages after multiple breakthroughs. The senior members of Qianyu faction, who were at Xiantian 4th or 5th stage, also had breakthroughs during this month and successfully stepped into Xiantian Shao realm, while some members also stepped into Xiantian 6th stage. In this short period of time, there was a qualitative mutation in Qianyu faction and its strength increased by leaps and bounds, as the core members suddenly leveled up. Thanks to this sudden increase in strength by leaps and bounds, now, Qianyu faction could be considered as a middle-level faction. Although it was still not comparable with the factions of other four prodisciples in terms of strength, but since only 1 month had passed after Yishuan became a prodisciple, one could imagine the growth potential of this faction. Soon, a big news spread throughout the sect that the 5th prodisciple, Yishuan, had set up an alchemy furnace on Qianyu Peak and was refining a large number of immortality pills, but instead of keeping them for himself, he was distributing it among the disciples of Qianyu faction, and as a result, their cultivation was increasing by leaps and bounds. At this rate, perhaps, Qianyu faction would be able to catch up with ordinary true disciple factions in a very short period of time, although there would still be a big gap between his faction and the 4 other pro-factions, but the speed was already amazingly quick. When everyone got to know that Yishuan was bleeding money to train members of Qianyu faction, suddenly numerous disciples were envious and wanted join, but it was too late now. Earlier, when the standards to join Qianyu faction were very low, they were just waiting and watching, and now when Yishuan actually became a pro-disciple, the standard requirements suddenly became much higher and they had no chance but to give up. Qianyu faction suddenly became the faction of elites, and if someone wanted to join it, the minimum requisite was to have one's cultivation at Xiantian 7th stage. But seeing the recruitment criteria of Qianyu faction, suddenly a lot of factions were at ease because it seemed like Qianyu faction was choosing the route of the elites and not expanding rapidly. And since Yishuan did not intend to expand rapidly, then they could also cooperate. After all, if Yishuan started open recruitment, without any prerequisites, then perhaps all of the idle disciples of Yi Yuan school would come running to join Qianyu faction. Just because Yishuan had kept high standards which included that the experts must be at Xiantian 7th stage at least and not older than 100 years old, and they must hold some kind of potential. During this month, Qianyu faction was recruiting members, but less than 70 to 80 people actually passed the requirement criteria, so the overall impact was not great. Then another mind-boggling news spread out that Yishuan was not just refining immortality pills but also refining Ling Dan. This suddenly alarmed many disciples, because they could ignore Xiantian Dan for once as they basically had no use of it, but the emergence of Ling Dan suddenly alarmed many true disciples. Because the so-called Ling Dan was actually produced by condensing the lingqi present in the air. A Ling Dan was made up of pure lingqi without any impurities, and when absorbed, its efficiency was much more when compared to directly absorbing lingqi from atmosphere or spirit stones. Lingqi could be absorbed from spirit stones, but there were still many impurities in them, but in case of Ling Dan, there were fewer impurities and contained higher quantity of lingqi, hence it had better quality and efficacy. Just like there was huge difference between low-grade spirit stones and high-grade spirit stones, there was a considerable difference between top-grade spirit stones and Ling Dan. One Ling Dan was comparable to several top-grade spirit stones, and, even the absorption efficiency of spirit stones was nowhere close to a Ling Dan. But ordinary experts could not refine Ling Dan, only masters of truth 6th stage and above were capable of refining Ling Dan. In fact, even masters of small truth could not refine Ling Dan. Only after reaching truth 6th stage, one was able to enter an entirely new level of understanding of world laws, and that's the reason why experts of truth 6th stage and above could condense Ling Dan. There was no need of alchemy furnace to condense Ling Dan, a true disciple could basically use his hand to condense Ling Dan. But most people, not even the master of truth 6th stage, could condense Ling Dan with high efficiency, and it would take more than one day in the completion of condensation process. If it was a half-step legendary master like Qi Fifan, then he might actually condense 1000 Ling Dan in a day. So Ling Dan was considered a hard currency in Zhenwujie. But for truth 6th stage experts, the condensed out Ling Dan were not enough even for their own use, then how could they possibly sell it to others? Of course, if they spent enough time then they would be able to condense many Ling Dan, but one must know that time was precious for truth level masters and it was necessary to save every minute to be able to have the next breakthrough, so they couldn't spend much time on condensing Ling Dan. Although Ling Dan could be mass-produced using alchemy furnace, but truth-level masters would rarely use Ito condense Ling Dan because it was extremely difficult to get one's hands on one. Chapter 205, Accumulation of Contacts. Since the shock of Yi Shiwen being promoted to the rank of a true disciple was too strong, so many people didn't pay attention to the promotion of Hua Menghan that happened around the same time. Although both had become the true disciples of Yi Yuan school, but in comparison, Hua Menghan was considerably low-key compared to Yi Shiwen. Therefore, the news of Yi Shiwen stepping into the truth realm was much more bizarre since he was merely a new disciple few months ago, whereas Hua Menghan had stayed at the half-step truth realm for a long time, so her breakthrough didn't come as a surprise to others. Yi Shiwen, are you really refining a lot of Ling Dan? Noticing the expectant look in her eyes, Yi Shiwen smiled and nodded. Indeed, if you want then I can send 1000 Ling Dan for free. Now, both Yi Shiwen and Hua Menghan were true disciples. Considering the fact that Yi Shiwen joined late, it should be said that Hua Menghan was his senior, but as the two of them belonged to the same generation of disciples, therefore they called each other without honorifics. All of a sudden, Hua Menghan was extremely surprised as she never expected that Yi Shiwen would just casually talk about gifting 1000 Ling Dan to her. One must know that it was not a small number when converted into spirit stones. This would be 100,000 top-grade spirit stones. So, how could Yi Shiwen so causally talk about gifting 1000 Ling Dan to her? The most important thing was that even if experts of truth 6th stage were torfined for 10 days and nights without eating and drinking, they would still not be able to refine so many Ling Dan. And this figure was equivalent to 1 month's worth of non-stop refining, and that too by an expert of truth 6th stage. In fact, the sum of 1000 Ling Dan was an astronomical figure even for an expert of truth 6th stage. Especially for experts like Hua Menghan who had recently stepped into the truth realm, even more so, 1000 Ling Dan were enough for them to practice all the way to the truth 5th stage without worrying about lack of spirit stones. After successfully crossing the small truth realm and reaching the truth 6th stage, there would be a tremendous change in one's skill and battle strength. One must know that there wasn't just one level difference between 5th and 6th stage of truth realm, so there would certainly be a huge difference in consumption rate as well. Although 1000 Ling Dan were enough to practice all the way to truth 5th stage, but the experts of truth 6th stage would actually be able to fully consume this amount in about 2 months. And for the experts of truth 7th stage or 8th stage, the consumption rate would rise exponentially, then the need for refining Ling Dan would certainly be much more. But this time, Hua Menghan was not at all interested in these 1000 Ling Dan. After all, her backing was not small. In all her life, she had never lacked practice resources whenever she needed them. She came to meet Yi Shiwen because she was worried about another thing. If you can refine so many Ling Dan, then you must be using some other means of refining, right? Hua Menghan said. Yi Shiwen nodded and did not hide because there was nothing to hide. In fact, there were lots of other ways in which one could refine Ling Dan. For example, one could catch a truth 6th stage slave and make him spend all his time in refining Ling Dan. This was simply a great waste of talent. Or if there were special instruments used, then it was possible to refine them. Everyone knew that since Yi Shiwen was not at Truth's sixth stage, then it was impossible for him to refine Ling Dan himself. The only possible way of refining so many Ling Dan was that he must be using some instrument to do so. But you must have a limited supply of Ling Dan, right? Hua Menghan asked. Yi Shiwen nodded. Of course, the production amount was limited since he was actually relying on Tianyuan mirror to refine Ling Dan from the Lingqi present in the atmosphere, but there were other harmful and harmless qi in the air, so the refining process was slow. In the most primitive means of practice, martial artists absorb qi directly from the air into the body, absorb Lingqi, and discharge other Yuseleski from the body. And Yi Shiwen didn't need to get involved, he was just using Tianyuan mirror to remove impurities and condense only Lingqi in the Ling Dan. Tianyuan mirror could independently take care of the refining job, but since only a portion of its strength had recovered, so it was capable of refining a limited amount of 500 Ling Dan in a day. However, although it could refine only 500 Ling Dan, but this figure was faster than a Truth 7th stage expert's refining speed. Considering Yi Shiwen's current Lingqi consumption rate, 500 Ling Dan were still sufficient to meet his needs, but with the constant progress in his cultivation, the consumption rate would also grow exponentially, but with time, the restoration of Tianyuan mirror would also be much more than now. This would make sure that the refining speed would be faster than consumption rate, so at least for a long period of time, Yi Shiwen would not need to worry about lack of Lingqi. And Yi Shiwen was not going to consume so much, hence he began to think about converting Ling Dan to spirit stones. In fact, he was definitely not doing a wonderful thing, but this was still a profitable move. 1 Ling Dan could be exchanged for 100 spirit stones. In fact, almost 50 spirit stones could be condensed into a Ling Dan when refined. So there was a difference of up to 100% profit, but the most important source of getting Ling Dan was Tianyuan mirror, which was not accessible to other experts. But if one needed much more pure and efficient Lingqi, one could get it directly and easily from a Ling Dan, which was the reason why they were willing to spend on them. Many people were aware of this fact, but very few people would actually opt to do it because refining Ling Dan was really uneconomical when the waste of practice time was taken into consideration, not to mention, only experts of Truth's 6th stage and above could refine them. So the better option was to earn spirit stones by completing tasks and missions from the sect, then use these spirit stones to buy Ling Dan. In fact, most of the sources of Ling Dan were actually the legendary realm experts or half-step legendary realm masters, since their refining speed was much faster than Truth realm masters. I guess you are aware of the restrictions, otherwise, you will end up snatching a core job from the legendary masters. Hua Menghan said. But you are not afraid that so many disciples have come to buy Ling Dan from you, and at the end of the day, you will not have enough Ling Dan left for yourself? Rest assured, that's totally not a problem. Although it seems like a lot of disciples have gathered for exchanging Ling Dan, but most of them are not from the upper ranks. The core disciples only want to buy enough Ling Dan to be of help to them in critical life-threatening situations, and in the case of true disciples, they actually have their own reliable means to obtain Ling Dan. It indeed caused a great sensation, but I am fully capable of coping up with the situation. Yi Shiwen said. After all, it was not difficult to condense Ling Dan, rather the time required for its refining was the main issue, thereby making its cost very high. Ling Dan was a very valuable practice resource for true disciples. Perhaps Yi Shiwen was the only one in the entire Yi Yuan school who could dare be so extravagant to openly sell them. After all, Ling Dan could be used in a critical moment to momentarily restore Jin Yuan, which would obviously be a contributing factor in saving a life. After reaching the true 6th stage, it was a basic norm for experts to find a balance point between refining Ling Dan and practice time. This balance was very necessary, and even Qi Fifan was not an exception to following this standard. Generally, experts preferred saving Ling Dan, but Yi Zaiwen did not take this seriously. According to Yi Shiwen, as long as he was getting enough spirit stones in exchange, he could continue to have a rapid increase in cultivation. Yi Zaiwen dared to maintain such transcendent practice speed due to the underlying causes, but in the eyes of others, it seemed as if he was spending such an enormous wealth in a short time. And the reason for that was that Yi Shiwen understood that strength was the ultimate truth in this world. As long as he possessed enormous strength, astronomical wealth would be waiting for him. Strength was the most fundamental thing in this world, it could question anything and was an answer to all. Buthan Hua Menghan reminded Yi Shiwen of his original decision of selling Ling Dan. Profit was indeed one of the very important reasons, but the fundamental reason was that he wanted Qianyu faction to accumulate enough contacts. As disciples from all over Yi Yuan school would continue to buy Ling Dan from Qianyu faction, they would inevitably owe favor to him and also to the entire faction, and favors like this would be repaid by them in the form of helping Qianyu faction in its expansion and development. Although Yi Shiwen had been relentlessly taking lives, but there was a truth he knew very well, that no one could be an enemy of everyone. People must have friends to watch their backs in critical times. And this exchange of Ling Dan was such a good opportunity to accumulate contacts, not to forget the word of mouth would also benefit Qianyu faction's reputation and status. After all, Qianyu faction might seem massive at first sight, but Yi Shiwen knew that it was just because he was promoted to the rank of a pro-disciple. However, in reality, Qianyu faction couldn't possibly compete with the factions of true disciples. In fact, at present, Qianyu faction's strength was equivalent to that of mid-level factions, because really powerful factions at least had more than 2 true disciples. Chapter 206, True Disciple joins. Precisely because of this, Yi Shiwen had a sense of crisis and urgency, because time waits for no one. Not to mention, there was a large gap between the strength of Qianyu faction and the factions of other pro-disciples or even true disciples of Truth's 7th, 8th, and 9th stage. Now, Yi Shiwen felt that he had become a bit high-profile. If he was alone, then others would naturally not care anyway, but now, since he was representing Qianyu faction, then most likely several forces would try to suppress its development. Yi Shiwen's intention was to accumulate as many connections for Qianyu faction as he could. In case of infinite redemption, it would certainly attract the attention of some super experts, but at that time, they wouldn't face an unfavorable situation pertaining to the development of Qianyu faction thanks to the sheer amount of accumulated contacts. Thank you for reminding me. Yi Shiwen said, from tomorrow onwards, Qianyu faction will start selling only 30 Ling Dan per day. This amount was less than 1/10 of Tianyuan mirrors per day refining capacity, so it was simply not a problem. Hua Menghan smiled at Yi Shiwen. He was really smart, and soon realized the meaning of her words. After all, the small amount of 30 Ling Dan won't attract too much attention. Of course, he would continue to produce large number of Ling Dan, but Qianyu faction would use them to redeem faction credits. This system was just like the system of redeeming sect credits. These rules were decided after Yi Shiwen had a consultation with Yi Feng and other high-level officials of Qianyu faction. But news about Yi Shiwen's decision set off a firestorm in Yi Yuan school. 30 Ling Dan were not much, especially with the huge demand in the sect, but in general, they were selling 30 per day, which was 900 per month. Going on like this, they would be selling thousands in a year. Suddenly, countless disciples raged up and rushed straight towards Qianyu Peak. But the requirements were very simple. Each person must take a number plate and stand in the queue. Each and everyone must show their number plate at the time of buying Ling Dan, otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to buy irrespective of the money they might offer. For a time, let alone Ling Dan, even those number plates had their price pushed up because of increased demand and lessened supply. But since Yi Shiwen had said that this was going to be a long-term exchange, so he would gradually increase the amount of Ling Dan as well. Although right now, he was providing only a small number, but he already managed to appease the hearts of many people, otherwise, perhaps riots would have been unavoidable in such a situation. It was not a difficult task for Yi Shiwen. Just this month Yi Shiwen refined more than 15,000 immortality pills, which was sufficient to meet the requirements for more than 1 year. And with time, his refining efficiency would continue to increase, and with Tianyuan mirror's further restoration, the refining speed would increase as well. Although only a month's time had passed, but Yi Shiwen exhibited powerful and magical means that people had never seen before. That's why, there were more and more people who wanted to come under his wings. Even if his strength was not as good as the strength of other pro-disciples, but also not too inferior. And if they joined his faction now, he would certainly not ill-treat them in the future. Yi Shiwen finally made his move, and it even attracted the attention of many true disciples. Apart from creating their own faction, true disciples also tend to join other factions. In fact, there were more than half who had not yet joined any faction and preferred being aloof. But whether it was a true disciple or core disciple, both faced a very important issue of lack of Lingqi for practice. Certainly, Yi Shiwen had no shortage of Lingqi at this point, but most true disciples did, and because of lack of Lingqi, their practice speed was always slow. Even though some of them were considered true geniuses, but there was a huge gap between them and a pro-disciple like Qi Fifan, and this gap could be narrowed if they had sufficient Lingqi for faster practice speed. Not being able to progress quickly brought upon another problem, and that was shortage of life. Although after breaking through to the truth realm, one could attain a lifespan of 500 years, but difficulty in breakthrough also increased exponentially with each stage. It was simply hard to imagine how tough it was to have a breakthrough in Truth realm. In fact, it was actually much easier to reach from Hotian realm to Truth realm. And only with rapid progress, they could reach the Truth 6th stage, and that would add extra 200 years to their lifespan. Then they would have enough time to think of ways of breaking into the legendary realm and attain the lifespan of millennium. For them, the desire for a breakthrough was far more than most people could ever imagine. Many true disciples took aim at Yi Shiwen. After all, although he was giving out dozens of Ling Dan daily, but no one was willing to believe that Yi Shiwen was capable of producing only this much. Yi Shiwen's refining capacity should certainly be far more than this number, because they couldn't possibly not see how members of Qianyu faction were allowed to redeem faction credits as Ling Dan. If they had joined Qianyu faction in the past, then with their truth level strength, they would certainly have enjoyed much more benefits compared to the average disciples. They could easily perform several tasks for the faction and exchange faction credits for Ling Dan. This was just having a stable income. And even if Yi Shiwen was not at Truth 6th stage, he was able to refine so many Ling Dan, so when he would step into Truth 6th stage, one could simply not imagine the number of Ling Dan he would refine in a day. Senior Yi, I sincerely want to join Qianyu faction. I hope you will give me shelter over here. At this time, the first true disciple finally appeared to join Qianyu faction. It was a middle-aged man dressed in old-fashioned robe, and his name was Yi Zhenren. Among all of the true disciples of Yi Yuan school, he was one of the oldest. He became a true disciple almost 200 years ago, and it could be said that status-wise, he was senior even to Chu Jingkai and other peerless experts of his generation. But right now, he called Yi Shiwen as Senior Yi. Of course, it was true that Yi Shiwen was now a pro-disciple, and theoretically, he was supposed to be senior in rank to all other true disciples. Now, he was on equal footing with only the other 4 pro-disciples. Yi Shiwen thought for a moment and instantly saw through his purpose of coming to him. Those weren't empty words, because he really spoke up his mind. He actually wanted to join Qianyu faction, and his main motivation for making this decision was to obtain Ling Dan. He was already more than 300 years old and was only at the 4th stage of Truth Realm, so basically, he could be counted among the old experts, and in the coming few decades, he would turn into an elder of the sect. Although true disciples and elders shared some of the parts, but there was a big inherent difference between them. But Yi Zhenren didn't want to just stay on the 4th stage of Truth Realm and then turn into an elder. He wanted to break through to the 6th stage of Truth Realm and continue to stay as a true disciple. He could not achieve it on his own, but Yi Shiwen could. Yi Shiwen was an outstanding existence who was appointed as the 5th pro-disciple of Yi Yuan school at such a young age. In the future, he might actually be much more successful than the legendary expert, Qi Fifan. So, if he chose to follow Yi Shiwen, in the future, he might be able to have a breakthrough, reaching 6th stage of Truth Realm or even above that. Basically, only a small breakthrough to the small Truth Realm and then to the Truth 6th stage could raise his status among the true disciples and bring him respect and prosperity that several other true disciples were unable to achieve. Then, he would be counted among few senior true disciples who were able to step into Truth 6th stage, which was considered extremely hard to achieve. Well, as long as you are sincerely to join, Qianyu faction will gladly welcome you, and you will never be ill-treated in the future. And for you, breaking through to the 6th stage will be something just around the corner. Yi Shiwen said with a loud laughter. Yi Zhenren was the first true disciple who willingly came to join the faction, so they would certainly not ill-treat him, not to mention, as long as a refuge true disciple was willing to help in the growth of Qianyu faction, there was no point in ill-treating him. Although Yi Shiwen was not the leader of Qianyu faction, but in reality, he was actually its spiritual leader. So it could be said that if he gave his word to someone, it would become a law for the whole faction to follow. And just now, he gave his word to Yi Zhenren. Yi Zhenren joined Qianyu faction. This news quickly spread throughout Yi Yuan school. The leaders of other forces sighed. After all, Qianyu faction was expanding quite fast, and that too right in front of their eyes. Chapter 207, to the Imperial City. But Yi Zaiwen did not have much time to deal with the matters of Qianyu faction. So he decided to leave all these matters mainly to Yan Qiling and others to deal with. After all, Yi Zaiwen was just a titular elder, though he was actually the lord of the court and most influential character in the entire faction, but he did not want to get involved in the management of too many chores. And now that Yi Zhenren had come to seek refuge in Qianyu faction, he got the position of law enforcement elder of the faction. Now, he was like the direct descendant of Qianyu faction since he had never been a part of any faction. And, even if no other true disciple would come to join, he would be staying in Qianyu faction for a very long time. In fact, keeping Yi Zaiwen aside, now he was the strongest member and final line of defense of Qianyu faction. Yi Zaiwen did not make him wait long and immediately rewarded him with 100 ling dong. Yi Zhenren was suddenly very excited because this amount was already much more than what he was able to obtain in the past several years. Yi Zaiwen did not hesitate anymore and began closed-door practice. Although the sect head himself came forward to announce that he would ensure Yi Shiwen's safety and security and definitely wouldn't allow the 8th prince to have his way. If their battle was to be scheduled about a decade later, then even if Yi Zaiwen was to die, the sect head wouldn't interfere. But at present, the scenario was entirely different. Not to forget, this was not the first time Theta Peerless Genius was being targeted, as the 5 forces had always been this way. Each time there was a rise of a peerless genius, the other forces would send their own to fight each other and eradicate any potential future threat. Who wouldn't know about the legendary lore about the rise of Qi Fifan in Yi Yuan school? But a sect absolutely wouldn't allow its distinguished disciples to die in unfair battles. It would be seriously the sect's arsenal, but in turn, they might send Qi Fifan to strike the 8th prince. However, that's another case that the royal clan would immediately come hopping to save their own. Yi Zaiwen had not yet begun the closed-door training. Weena task came out of nowhere. After several months of preparation, the royal clan seemed all prepared to organize a large force which would be tasked to destroy the ever-sporadic Bimogia strongholds throughout the Great Yu State. The largest force that the Great Yu State had ever seen finally began to reveal its fang. It was a result of 100 years of accumulation which finally began to come out. For a major force like Yi Yuan school, 100 years was almost like a generation's time to grow, but one could imagine that this accumulated strength, and that too in a span of 100 years, was going to be scary. All of the secret legions were about to reveal their true strength. They were going to rush throughout the country and eliminate Bimojiao. Now, even the royal clan couldn't help but use its full strength to wipe out the Bimogia forces. However, Yi Yuan school could not possibly rely on other forces. To destroy Bimojiao, the ordinary legions would just act as cannon fodder. They would certainly play the part of warrior regiments. The royal clan had helped in the production and development of Thesa legions for so many years, and finally, they were all forthcoming for a collective action. This time, the 4 major sects got the invitation from the royal clan, inviting them with the request to send the most elite experts to take part in the expedition against Bimojiao. It basically meant that the 4 forces needed to dispatch truth-level experts because in general, sending Xiantian-level experts wouldn't have much impact on the strengthening of legions. Since, there were already many Xiantian-level experts in Theroyalclan, but it lacked truth-level experts, particularly now when they wanted to suppress Bimogia through out the Great Yu State. Being a pro-disciple, Yi Zaiwen also received the task to go to the Imperial City as a pro-disciple of Yi Yuan school. And not just him, even Qi Fifan also received the same task. Out of the 5 pro-disciples, Chu Jingkai was busy training in the deep space of Yi Yuan School, whereas both Huang Luochen and Shui Yanluo were out on campaign, so this time, only Qi Fifan and Yi Shiwen were tasked to go to Imperial City. Also taking into account that this was not the first collaboration between the two, so sending them together was justified. Although Yi Zaiwen's strength was not enough, but as long as he had the identity of the pro-disciple of Yi Yuan School, no one would dare to not listen to him. But Yi Zaiwen and Qi Fifan didn't go together. He had some matter to deal with in Qianyu faction, so Qi Fifan took a group of people with him and left early. Imperial capital. According to the rumors, it is considered the liveliest and most prosperous area in the entire Great Yu state. Regardless of day and night, the whole city is lightened with endless lit-colored lamps, making it seem like there's day all the time. Yi Zaiwen remembered the description of the imperial city that he had read before in books, but he had never gone there in person. Certainly, this was just the impression of ordinary people. However, it was indeed true that imperial capital was the supreme headquarter of the royal clan, comprising of many experts like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and several others famous ones. Although no one dared to point at them, but everyone knew about them. In fact, there were rumors that some devil experts were also hidden in the imperial city. The entire imperial city could be considered as Great Yu State's most prosperous city with the resident population of over 20 million, when not considering the floating population. Yi Zaiwen found Yi Feng and handed over almost 15,000 Ling Dan to him. Anyway, for Yi Shiwen, as long as he desired, he could obtain as many as he needed. He could obtain a steady stream of Ling Dan from Tianyuan Mirror, so at the moment, these Ling Dan weren't so valuable for him. It could be said that right now, great wealth was right at his fingertips. Brother, you are going to the imperial capital. Be careful there, that place the stronghold of the royal clan. Yi Feng said with some concern for Yi Shiwen. There are numerous experts of royal clan in the imperial capital, such as Hairy Ox, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, let alone a lot of people have come to hate you because of 8th Prince's matter. So, you must be extremely careful. Rest assured, brother, I will be fine. Yi Zaiwen smiled and said, if someone tries to target me, I won't hold back either. Yi Zaiwen flatly said, but his words were full of killing intention. If he were to kill the 8th Prince in Imperial City, the royal clan won't tolerate it. But, Yi Shiwen was certainly not a scapegoat because he had the backing of Yi Yuan School, one of the 5 major forces of Great Yu State. Even the royal clan couldn't dare to offend such an enormous beast. Yi Zaiwen did not wait long and left for imperial capital the very next day. Qi Fifan left for the same. He opened his devil wings and flew towards the imperial city, darting all the way. In just a span of one day and night, he arrived at the periphery of the imperial city wall, retracted the devil wings and descended near the city gate. The imperial city was just like Yi Yuan School, there were numerous no-fly zones over the entire city. There was a circle of protection hanging directly over the city, but on the inside, there were no hard and fast rules. When going through the city gate, the city looked so large that it was simply hard to imagine its vastness. The city wall stretched thousands of li from east to west. Even in the previous world, Yi Zaiwen had not seen such a huge city. The perimeter of the city wall stretched up to 1,000 li and was about 10 li in width. There was literally no way one could see the terminus of this city. Yi Zaiwen looked around and found the entire city filled with Xiantian masters. Xiantian level experts were present simple everywhere, even on walls. Patrol soldiers were actually Xiantian powerhouses. Moreover, not just ordinary powerhouse, their cultivations were very deep. Looking from afar, it seemed as if bloody Xiantian qi was shooting round after round up into the sky. If not considering that it was the imperial capital of Great Yu State, it would have been a terrifying sight to withhold. Looking ahead, even pedestrians on the road possessed high cultivation levels. There were Xiantian masters everywhere, and Yi Shiwen could occasionally sense some truth-level experts from time to time. And sometimes, he could sense the surge of terrifying aura from the depths of the palace. This was simply a terrible and dangerous spot, exceptionally horrifying, really worthy of being a royal stronghold. Flying was not prohibited inside so long as one didn't go near the city wall. Only a small number of experts were flying near the city wall, and they too probably belonged to the royal clan. Because if a person didn't belong to the royal clan and he tried to fly near the city wall, then that would trigger the enchantment and shoot him down. The royal clan certainly had a special way to face this enchantment. As he went inside, he had a vague feeling about the pressure of this enchantment. No one knew exactly when the Great Yu State was founded, probably some 1,000 years ago, so it could be considered that this enchantment was set up back then and had been reinforced multiple times to last this long. In fact, it was so strong that even if a truth-level expert tried to face it head-on, he would still have a fearful feeling in his heart while facing it. Therefore, even if there were lots of experts in the city but no one dared to fly near the city wall. Yi Zaiwen entered the imperial city, and the first thing he needed to do was to find the place where his fellow disciples of Yi Yuan School were residing, but it was not difficult. After all, Yi Yuan School was one of the 4 major sects, so the place where they had settled would naturally be famous and widely known. Yi Zaiwen was walking on a wide avenue, although it was the sidewalk, but was wide enough to accommodate 2 carriages at once. The street was crowded with people and the eyesight of these residents was very sharp. Although Yi Zaiwen was deliberately restraining his cultivation, but they were still able to recognize that he was a truth-level disciple, despite his commoner-like appearance. He is a truth-level master, absolutely yes. Look, as he is walking, the air surrounding him is also changing, which is a symbol of a truth-level expert. Yes, you are right, and this is not the usual calm aura of a truth-level disciple who has recently stepped into the truth realm. Look at his armband, he is a disciple of Yi Yuan School. Well, Yi Yuan School is really worthy of being one of the 4 major sects, one mighty expert after another. Indeed, yesterday itself a team of experts arrived from Yi Yuan School. Didn't you sense that mighty aura? It reportedly belongs to the leader of that team, who is actually one of the 5 pro-disciple of Yi Yuan School. He is called Qi Fifan. When he was young, he once came to the imperial city and picked fights with the experts all over the city, and that power and prestige he showed back then was truly mesmerizing. But they say that Yi Yuan School has sent 2 pro-disciples. Did you see the second one? Chapter 208, 9th Prince Yulin, but they say that Yi Yuan School has sent 2 pro-disciples. Did you see the second one? I did not see. Reportedly he did not come together with Qi Fifan, but since you mentioned him, I tell you, there's a true story about this guy. What is it? Let us hear as well. This pro-disciple is actually the same guy who was challenged to a duel by our 8th prince. This guy is much undisciplined and out of control. He is only 20 years old but actually beheaded the commander of Imperial Guards. It really shocked the entire nation. What, Feng Kong was killed by him? Then he must really be a fierce guy. When the 8th prince would come back from the ruins, I'm afraid he would burn with rage. The 8th prince would certainly not let him off. After all, Feng Kong used to be his most capable assistant. No way. Yi Yuan School's head has personally come forward to grant full protection to this guy, so how would the 8th prince lay his hands on him? It is said that this guy is very young, and if this duel was to be scheduled 10 years from now, then maybe, he would be able to compete with the 8th prince. This Yi Yuan School really has an abundance of talented individuals. Earlier, it was Qi Fifan and now they have Yi Xuan as well. The heaven really prefers that sect. This is nothing. Tell me which forces don't have 1 or 2 geniuses like that. Even if Yi Xuan can contend with the 8th prince, but he can only contend, he cannot win at any cost. Indeed, after all, legendary characters like Qi Fifan appear only once in decades. The pedestrians were whooping among themselves on the street, but Yi Xuan didn't actually care. Their talks couldn't have the slightest effect on his state of mind, since his state of mind had already been practiced to the rock-solid state. Hence he was usually always calm, composed and focused on his objectives. However, Yi Xuan wasn't actually in a hurry to meet up with Qi Fifan and the others. It's been a long time since he arrived in this world, and after so long, he once again got the chance to aimlessly wander about in a fairly developed city. The streets, markets, and crowds soon reminded him of his past life, giving him a feeling that he was back on the earth. But this was not the previous world. The customs here were very different, and so were the people walking on the road. Basically, each and every one of them possessed power in their bodies, although not all of them were formidable. There were also some who were at the 5th or 6th stage of Hotian realm. The city and its residents themselves were the source behind the legions, and with such a strong foundation, no wonder these legions were so formidable. Along the way, he saw a variety of shops that looked magnificent. These shops had this abnormal atmosphere around them which made them seem even more grandiose. In fact, they were even more magnificent than some of the mansions for aristocrats. And everywhere, the houses were very tall, stretching all the way up to 10 floors or even more. These houses had the general structure of wooden houses but weren't made up of wood. A special kind of willow tree wood was used to construct them, and its strength was almost comparable to that of steel. Yi Shiwen knew that these stores didn't deal with ordinary individuals. They only welcomed powerful warriors or rich people who held valuable things to exchange. Not just that, these stores only accepted Ling Dan as currency. And right now, the number of Ling Dan in his possession could neither be considered more nor less. In fact, even an amount of 500 Ling Dan could not be considered much in imperial markets. Yi Shiwen did not delay any more. He asked a local resident about the location of Yi Yuan School's courtyard and quickly arrived there. It was a magnificent courtyard and seemed to be made up of gold and jade. It was currently the residence of the team which arrived from Yi Yuan School and also the permanent place of stay for Yi Yuan School's delegates. Brother Yi is here. Brother Yi. Brother Yi. As Yi Shiwen arrived, the sharp-eyed disciples recognized him immediately and greeted him respectfully. Yi Shiwen did not stay long with them and soon found Qi Fifan. Brother Qi, sorry for being late. Yi Shiwen cupped his hands and said, No big deal, you are not late for the task. Qi Fifan smiled and said, I presume this is the first time Young Yi has visited the imperial capital. How about you go out on a stroll? No, I would prefer getting down to business matters. Yi Shiwen shook his head. He had seen far too many metropolitans in his past life, and even in this world, it was almost nothing more than a little bit difference in customs and thought process. Good, a while ago, the royal clan briefed us about the task. Basically, the truth-level experts are supposed to destroy the Bai Majiao strongholds, which are scattered throughout the Great Yu State. Qi Fifan frowned and said, but this time, the situation is quite stern, that's why the royal clan has invited strong experts to go into action. The day after tomorrow we will split off, I hope you are prepared. As far as the 8th prince's matter is concerned, I'm afraid there are some experts from royal clan who are very dissatisfied with you. Qi Fifan said. If they dare to cause trouble for me, I won't hold back either and behead them all if required. But, in this crucial time, shouldn't royal clan try to restrict the needless actions of its members? Yi Shiwen indifferently said. After talking for a while, both Yi Shiwen and Qi Fifan got busy in preparing for the task, which was scheduled to start the day after tomorrow. Yi Shiwen went down to prepare in his private small courtyard. Just when he was about to start practicing, the voice of a disciple caught his attention. Brother Yi, Great Yu's 9th prince has come to visit you. Yi Shiwen frowned, confused about what the 9th prince wanted from him. Anyway, because of the 8th prince's matter, several members of royal clan didn't hold goodwill for him, and now, the 9th prince suddenly appeared out of nowhere to visit him, but for what? Send him inside. Yi Shiwen said and thought, since the 9th prince had come in person, shutting him out wouldn't be fair. In a few moments, 2 figures appeared outside the courtyard. One of which was a handsome youth with dignified appearance who appeared to be 20 years old and clad in a royal-looking bright yellow dragon robe. Behind him was an old man in black clothes who was slavishly following the young man. Seeing Yi Shiwen, the man clad in dragon robe stepped forward, cupped his hands and said, You must be Brother Yi. I am the 9th imperial prince of Great Yu State, named Yulin. Yulin cupped his hands to show respect to Yi Shiwen even though he came from royal background. After all, in this world, strength was the supreme law. Being a truth-level expert, Yi Xuan commanded enough respect, and Ninth Prince showed proper etiquette by greeting him this way, especially because both of them belonged to the same generation of experts. Nice to meet you, Ninth Prince. Yi Xuan also greeted him respectfully. Considering Yi Ziwen's values, if the other party was being polite, then there was no need to give them a cold shoulder. I am not aware of Ninth Prince's reason for this sudden visit. Yi Xuan straightforwardly jumped to the main issue. It seems like Brother Yi is also a straightforward person like me. I see, I will not beat around the bush. Yu Lin smiled and said, frankly speaking, I have come here hoping to form an alliance with Brother Yi. To form an alliance, Yi Xuan was surprised all of a sudden, then looked curiously at the Ninth Prince, smiled and said, Your Highness seems mistaken about something. Why would he think about forming an alliance with me? Of course, there is one reason behind this. For example, what if I say it's the 8th Imperial Brother? The Ninth Prince faintly smiled and said. As he mentioned the 8th Prince, Yi Ziwen's pupils immediately contracted. He then smiled and said, the 8th Prince, how exactly? Yi Xuan actually began to think crazily, extracting points and facts from the news he had been obtaining lately. There were about a dozen princes in Great Yu State, and at least 4/5 of them were already all grown up. All of them were ambitious, outstanding, talented, and considered one of the best in their generation, capable enough to mount the throne as the Emperor of Great Yu State. But it was not at all surprising since they had obtained the most elite education, but the biggest problem was that there was only one throne and only one person could mount it. And among these princes, few were exceptionally powerful and influential. The eldest prince, the second prince, the fourth prince and the 8th prince, these four were by far considered the most powerful candidates for the throne. They were not just powerful, they also had people's support, and they had also accumulated support from several peerless experts. But, the most recent eye-catching prince among them was the 8th prince, because looking at the rate his strength was enhancing lately, he would most likely step into the legendary realm and might become the legendary emperor, and that too after the gap of several generations. Although during the imperial power struggle, personal strength was not the most important thing, but it was still a considerably important factor in deciding the victor. And, Yi Xuan was most concerned about this because with respect to these four strongest princes, the 9th prince was definitely not one of the most dazzling princes left in the competition. In fact, a lot of people didn't even know that he existed. It could be said that he was relatively low-key, but there was a possibility that this was because Yi Xuan was not too concerned about the royal clan and its affairs. But, the news about several other princes usually reached Yi Yuan School as rumors. After all, Great Yu State was under the rule of royal clan. Although they lived in peace for thousands of years, but who could possibly predict the next emperor's character? What if a madman was to ascend the throne and decided to go to war with them? Not to forget, it was possible for any of the princes to ascend the throne, so Yi Yuan School used to obtain specific information about royal clan's affairs. In fact, they had stationed a special person in charge of studying these princes, and whenever they pointed out a prince who was relatively on unfriendly terms with Yi Yuan School, they would either get rid of him or at least make them lose the throne. Also, this was not just the case for Yi Yuan School. Even other major sects also followed the same line of politics. But, even on the research files of Yi Yuan School, the name of the 9th prince was nowhere to be seen, which proved how low-key he really was. However, today, it seemed like something was different about him. Brother Yi, do you really want me to state it? The 9th prince said with a smile, the news about your duel with the 8th imperial brother had already spread throughout the Great Yu State. Chapter 209, Alliance, so what? Yi Xuan said. I know that your sect's head has announced that he will protect you, but considering my 8th imperial brother's character, he will not give up so easily. The 9th prince further said, actually, we have a common enemy. Enemy, the word just slipped out of his mouth, as he continued to ponder. It seemed like in the research files of Yi Yuan School, at least the information about the 9th prince was certainly missing. Yi Yuan School certainly had an unpleasant impression of the 8th prince, and the reason was very simple, because the 8th prince was very ambitious. He basically wanted to control all of the 4 major sects on his fingertips. Even so, it doesn't seem like we have anything to cooperate on, or do you think you can stop your 8th imperial brother? Yi Shiwen asked. It should be said that it's about mutual help and mutual cooperation. I know that you are a pro-disciple of Yi Yuan school and sooner and later, you are going to have a thriving future, and that is the basis of our cooperation. The 9th prince lightly said. Apparently he was a very proud fellow and usually didn't prefer paying much attention to ordinary people. You help me ascend the throne, and after I mount the throne, I will use my royal power to help you mount the position of Yi Yuan school's head. The 9th prince indifferently said, but the way he said it was quite direct and straightforward. I am different from my 8th imperial brother, I am not as ambitious as him and neither do I dream of putting the complete control of Great Yu State into the hands of royal clan. The 9th prince said. It was not as if he was resentful against the 8th prince. It was just difficult for him to accept the 8th prince's ambition of dominating the 4 major sections. Even if the 8th prince is out of question, I can still choose from a lot of other princes. Yi Shiwen said. After all, he knew that there were about a dozen princes in the empire, not to forget the eldest prince, the 2nd prince and the 4th prince. Now, the eldest imperial brother, the 2nd imperial brother and the 4th imperial brother have formed an alliance with Chu Jingkai, a pro-disciple of your Yi Yuan school. The 9th prince said. And, as far as the remaining imperial brothers are concerned, I assure you that none of them is stronger than me. I should be, by far, the most suitable partner for Brother Yi. The 9th prince confidently said. It's the right choice for both of us. Both of them held equivalent levels of potential. Yi Shiwen had recently emerged and was being compared to a legend like Qi Fifan, but he still had a very long way to go to become his rival. And, the 9th prince also had tremendous potential but he was still in his dormant period, however, he was still an ambitious dragon. Yi Shiwen, this 9th prince is not an ordinary guy. Yi Mo said. He not much older than you, but his cultivation has already reached the 4th stage of Truth Realm, and I can see that he holds strong talent. I'm afraid I don't see much difference in his potential and that of the so-called 8th prince. After listening to the words of Yi Mo, Yi Shiwen considered for a moment. This 9th prince so confidently came to him and that too not without reason, although it was certainly a complementary cooperation of the two. But, Yi Shiwen didn't have the interest in the sect head's position, still he would certainly having some powerful connections, so in the end, it was a good choice. Such being the case, I would respectfully do what you say, but always remember, deference is no substitute for obedience. Yi Shiwen spilled out a strange smile and said. Suddenly, there was a look of pleasant surprise on the face of the 9th prince. The kind of shocked expression he had on his face right now was actually a rare sight. Finally, a big rock fell off the heart of the 9th prince. In fact, today he came to meet Yi Shiwen but didn't have any grasp over the situation. In addition to that, Yi Shiwen might have opted to help other princes since he was relatively low-key when compared to his other imperial brothers. Not to forget, Yi Shiwen recently became the pro-disciple and was known as the next Qi Fifan of Yi Yuan school, so there was no need for him to be in a hurry to make a decision. In comparison, Yi Shiwen was a greater figure than him, considering both status and popularity. That's why when Yi Shiwen nodded, he could not help but feel a big stone falling off his heart. So long as Brother Yi agrees, it's all good. Today, I will go back to the castle and make a request from Father Emperor, so that Brother Yi gets transferred to my legion. The 9th prince suddenly said in a lofty manner, this will be my first time commanding troops in battle and I can only finish the battle in one fell swoop in a majestic manner, then only it will lay my position in the eyes of Father Emperor. You see, in this battle, we can only win, we don't have the luxury of losing, so Brother Yi must also win in a grand way. Yi Shiwen nodded. It seemed like the 9th prince didn't intend to continue to stay dormant, but again, if he actually planned to stay dormant for some more time then at the time of choosing the emperor for the throne, he would have no chance against the 4 strongest princes. Now these princes needed opportunities to show their valiance and courage. They must succeed in a short time, just the way the 8th prince did it. And they only had one way left to do that, they must courageously march forward, destroying all the obstacles and enemies in their way, constantly winning and rising towards the final goal. Yi Shiwen nodded. Since he had already made the decision to help the ninth prince, he would certainly help to the very end. Where is your legion going the day after tomorrow? Yi Shiwen asked. To the Haishui's lair in the East China Sea. That Haishui is really very audacious. He dared to join hands with the devil. When we reach there, we have been tasked to slaughter all of the deep-water black snakes. None of those beasts shall be left alive. The ninth prince said with an irrepressible excitement, which was quite understandable since he was going to be the leader of his own legion for the first time. And if he did not succeed, then, this might end up being the last time. The power struggle for throne was a very nasty game. In fact, many princes did not get a chance to show their strength. Those who managed to show their potential would get only one chance to prove themselves, otherwise they would get eliminated. But, Haishui's lair is the residing place of half-step legendary level demon beast. At my current level, I cannot deal with him. Yi Shiwen said since the deep-water Black Serpent King had left a very deep impression on him last time. Rest assured, naturally the royal clan will take care of that beast. The ninth prince said as he really valued Yi Ziwen's life, considering he knew that Yi Shiwen was not yet a grown-up and had limitless future. That's no problem. Yi Shiwen nodded. Chapter 210, Destruction of Haishui's lair. The royal clan moved very quickly. There wasn't the so-called hauling or procrastination. The entire huge state apparatus began to move up, and in the face of such a thing, it seemed as if it was advancing to subvert the rule of this country. The mobilization speed of Yu Imperial clan went far beyond the imagination of Yi Shiwen. At this time, this was a display of the true strength of this legendary bureaucracy which was driving hundreds of thousands into actions at the same time. Early in the morning, one after another, several teams finally began to reveal their fangs. They were advancing towards the respective city gates of the Imperial City in order to march out of the city. Hundreds of thousands of experts were marching together which suddenly shocked the whole city. However, the citizens were not at all afraid. Due to the abrupt surfacing of Bai Majiao, there had been turmoil for several months and everyone was aware of that. Although Bai Majiao had not dared to be dissolute in the imperial capital, but they truly did some serious damage to the Great Yu state. Yi Shiwen was flying at a very high altitude in the sky and watching how the combative armies were marching out of the imperial gates. He was now fully aware of the fact that Great Yu state contained astonishing strength, which was finally unveiled in front of his eyes. The fearful power of several legions was finally unleashed and fully emerged. The murderous aura swept off throughout the sky and the clouds seemed to have been minced. One simply didn't stand a chance when facing such an army, unless he was a legendary level expert. Soon, Yi Ziwen's wait for his own team was over when he saw the special regiment of Imperial Armed Forces marching forward with the Great Tiger's flag fluttering on the forefront. The Imperial soldiers were mostly the experts of Xiantian realm, and the higher-ranked commanders were experts of Xiantian's 6th stage or above. The particularity of Great Yu's royal clan was that they didn't have too many top players unlike other major sects, but they housed far too many experts of Xiantian realm, and the sheer number far surpassed any of the major sections. Yesterday, the ninth prince was clad in a royal dragon robe, but today, he was wearing a military uniform, which was giving him a heroic aura. As usual, the old man in black clothes was following him and sticking close behind him. The old man's cultivation was only faintly discernible and his skills seemed very profound. A huge fleet of battleships appeared on the ground, stationed about 10 li outside the imperial city wall. The imperial soldiers marched towards these battleships and boarded them. Dozens of warships soon took off together. These battleships were actually the divine tools. Their might was simply infinite and were completely different from the warships used by the Great Yu state during national campaigns and ordinary expeditions. Yi Shiwen also flew down and landed on a warship which was being led by the high-spirited ninth prince. "Brother Yi, this is the beginning of our great cause," the ninth prince said in a somewhat complacent manner. Yi Shiwen did not speak, however, a faint smile appeared on his face. One after another, battleships turned into dazzling streamers of light and flew far towards the horizon. In just half-day's time, these battleships reached the East China Sea and descended on the seawater. However, even in the sea, these battleships were scary fast and charging around violently. There literally was nothing to stop these ships, and the demon beasts that mistakenly came in their path were crushed miserably and simply turned into small bits of flesh and blood splatter. Soon, they arrived in the waters around Haishui's lair. Begin extermination and clean up each and every living thing in this and the nearby areas. I want it completely cleaned up. Don't forget to wipe out all the demon beasts here, not even a shrimp must be left alive. I want this place to turn into Haishui's graveyard. The ninth prince roared while he was brimming with killing intention. As you command, my lord. The might of thousands of imperial soldiers manifested rapidly. The demon beasts of Haishui's lair couldn't possibly be the match of an organized and trained army, not to forget the imperial army consisted of Xiantian-level soldiers and several truth-level commanders. Suddenly, the whole sea turned bloody and chaotic. One could hear the pitiful roars and screams of demon beasts, transmitting straight from the sea. After having swept clean the demon beasts on the sea level, the Imperial Corps proceeded to gradually dive into the sea. The soldiers were equipped with proper underwater equipments to enable breathing inside the sea, so that slaughtering demon beasts in the depths of the sea would be no problem at all. Yi Xuan sighed with emotion and thought that the royal clan was filthy rich and to the extent that the other sects simply didn't stand a chance in front of its wealth. Who dares to massacre my subjects? A loud roar rang out from the depths of seabed and about 10,000 feet long deep-water Black Snake King instantly jumped out of the seabed with its mouth open, which suddenly sucked in dozens of imperial soldiers who were swallowed whole in one breath and were eaten raw. At this moment, the deep-water Black Snake King's great roar terribly shook everyone's eardrums. This one roar was equivalent to the sound produced by 1,000 big drums. One swing from his huge and powerful tail shook the entire sea, but Yi Xuan clearly saw a massive wound on his tail which once again cracked open, along with splashes of blood spreading in the seawater, when he swung his tail. Apparently, this was an injury that he received during the previous fight and it still hadn't healed. Haishui, how dare you collaborate with those devils? Today, in the name of imperial decree, I must exterminate you and all these evildoers. The ninth prince stepped forward and shouted to clear the way. Today, this Haishui's lair will be destroyed, and it will be completely removed from the East China Sea. Kill! The soldiers of Imperial Guard armed forces roared and the murderous aura of the deadliest of soldiers immediately upset the sea water. It was really an incomparably fearful sight. At this time, there a hint of regret on the face of Deepwater Black Snake King. He had been thoroughly misled by Lu Hongwei, so the regret was much self-explanatory in this situation. Evildoer, today is the day you die. At this time, the old man in black clothes instantly flew up and a terrifying aura spread out in all directions. Despite having a skinny body, his presence was just like that of a mountain. The chi exploded out of his body and spread out in the surrounding radius of several thousand miles. Half-step legendary master. Yi Xuan gawked for a moment because he never expected that the skinny old man, who always followed around the ninth prince and never left his side, would turn out to be a half-step legendary expert. He finally understood the hidden meaning behind the ninth prince's words when he said that the royal clan would deal with the beast, so the ninth prince was secretly talking about the black-clothed old man. By quietly roping in a half-step legendary expert into his faction, it could be seen that the ninth prince was really aiming for the throne. He had secretly done no small preparation for this. Who are you? The Deepwater Black Snake roared fiercely when he saw a half-step legendary expert standing in his way. If he was not injured, then dealing with a half-step legendary expert would have been no trouble for him, but right now, he was in a dire situation and he could sense that he was facing a terrifying expert. I am the one who is going to end your life. The black-clothed old man indifferently said. You should know that the devil invasion is close. Do you want to go against the heaven's will? The Deepwater Black Snake exclaimed. A lowly beast like you dares to teach me? The black-clothed old man disdainfully said. The old man's palm gradually turned blood red and the surrounding water instantly evaporated. Yi Xuan could not help but gasped. This technique was extremely frightening. This old man was clearly much stronger than an expert of half-step legendary level. Die. The old man moved up instantly, and it appeared like his physique suddenly turned into a water sword and rushed straight towards the Deepwater Black Snake King. A gigantic hand congealed out of nowhere and grabbed the beast into its grasp. And right then, it appeared as if an endless scarlet hell evolved instantaneously and crashed right into the body of the Deepwater Black Snake King. Great blood handprint. Soaring dragon. The Deepwater Black Snake King roared, and its giant body instantly churned up the endless seawater, sweeping off a section of seawater which eventually took the form of a water dragon and rushed towards the incoming great blood handprint attack. The roars of a dragon were constantly reverberating across the seabed. Boom! The two sides did not stay idle and immediately started a decisive battle of life and death. With each collision between their blows, it seemed as if the world would collapse any second. Even the warships couldn't stand firm in the face of those terrifying shock waves. The entire sea was being destroyed. Bang! The blood splashed into the seawater, the flesh and blood flew in all directions. A large but fresh wound could be seen on the body of the Deepwater Black Snake King. The Deepwater Black Snake King suddenly screamed pitifully, while at the same time, he spat out a water sword from his mouth which turned into an ice-cold treasured sword and instantly rushed straight towards the old man. It was quite surprising to see that the old man stimulated Jin Qi inside his body, which burst out of his body and congealed into a bloody big hand. This scarlet big hand instantly caught the water sword and crushed it, and right after that, the big hand rushed towards the Deepwater Black Snake King. Everyone was shocked while watching this scene. They were quietly watching this battle as everyone knew that this end result of this battle was ultimately going to decide the life and death of the two sides. Their own fights were basically insignificant in this situation. Boom! There came a terrifying burst of sound, and the old man's big bloody hand directly pierced through the tail of the Deepwater Black Snake King and ripped it off the very next instant. Yi Shiwen was quite surprised because this black-clothed old man was way too powerful than an average half-step legendary expert. Just like in the case of Qi Fifan, other half-step legendary experts weren't the match for this old man as well. If the Deepwater Black Snake King was not seriously injured, he wouldn't be in such a miserable state. The Deepwater Black Snake King was screaming again and trying to get away, but a bloody big hand was constantly in his pursuit. Boom! Accompanied by a terrifying sound of an explosion, that bloody big hand grabbed the Deepwater Black Snake King. Since the old man already knew that the Deepwater Black Snake King was injured, he couldn't possibly let go of this chance of slaughtering this formidable beast. I don't want to die. The Deepwater Black Snake roared, but its skull was directly grasped in the big bloody hand and instantly crushed, splashing the brain fluid and blood into the seawater. Dash. Chapter 211, The Eighth Prince arrives. 2 months flew by, and for the Great Yu State, the war was getting more and more intense during the past 2 months. The royal clan had sent out its forces to siege for Maine by Majiao strongholds. The scope of war was getting bigger and bigger. Yi Shiwen was also following the conquests of imperial forces. They performed distinguished service and achieved illustrious military exploits. The reputation of initially low-key Ninth Prince also rose up dramatically. Now everyone knew about his exploits and achievements. The people had come to realize that perhaps, the Ninth Prince was yet another suitable candidate for the throne of Great Yu State. However, for Yi Shiwen, it seemed as if all of these achievements didn't have any relations with him. He only spent 1 month with the Ninth Prince's Legion, then rushed back to Yi Yuan School and began closed-door training. Now, it's been a month since Yi Shiwen began the closed-door training, but it was nothing in the eyes of most people. After all, martial cultivation was something that continued for hundreds of years. However, the real problem was that a few days ago, the Eighth Prince finally came back from an ancient ruin and must have brought back some extremely valuable treasures from that place. The strongest expert of the younger generation, the Supreme Presence, was finally back as a legend. But, mostly everyone in Yi Yuan School was aware of the case. They knew that the duel between Yi Shiwen and the Eighth Prince would most likely happen soon. Although the sect head had personally announced that he did not give the permit to this duel, but the 8th prince was not the type of man who would honestly obey the instructions. Everyone was kind of unsure in their hearts. But regardless of what everyone was thinking, the 8th prince finally arrived for Yi Shiwen. A figure suddenly appeared flying from the void, and at the place where he descended, the air itself ruptured and pulled open the vacuum. It could be seen that a mighty existence had arrived at the main gate of Yi Yuan School. Yi Shiwen, come out to die. A young man, clad in a magnificent dragon robe and carrying a cold look on his face, suddenly roared. He had such a dominating presence that it swept off waves of Lingqi in the air that went rolling across the gate. The entire surrounding was in a state of shock and chaos. One could clearly see that the 8th prince was courageous enough to clamor like this in front of Yi Yuan School's gate. The 8th prince was soaring in the sky, the long spear in his hand was producing a buzzing noise, while there was a strange blood-red aura surrounding it. This blood-red aura was actually filled with the essence and blood of the enemies that had been killed by this spear. This spear was such a kindaf tool which could grow stronger as it continued to absorb the blood from the enemies. This caused a sensation throughout Yi Yuan School. So many years had passed since the last time someone dared to be so arrogant to pull off such a stunt. A huge crowd of Yi Yuan School's disciples arrived at the gate, but they were watching from afar. They simply didn't dare to approach because they could clearly sense a kind of cold and strange murderous aura. Even the true disciples didn't dare to go too close. They only surrounded the 8th prince while maintaining some distance. At this time, the disciples were worried for Yi Shiwen. To be fair, they were well aware of the fact that Yi Shiwen was very formidable. A few months ago, they had come to know about the profoundness of his skill and cultivation when they heard his fierce roar. No wonder he was made the 5th pro-disciple at such a young age. But, the great strength of the 8th prince was not hidden from anyone. He dared to be so unruly in front of the main gate, the kindaf courage he had was not something an ordinary expert could display so casually. The dreadful imposing aura swept across while he was at the center of the formation of a huge field which was solely made up of Zhenyuan. If anyone went in, they would be in his absolute control. 8th prince, you are really presumptuous if you think you can be so rampant in front of my Yi Yuan School's gate. A figure arrived floating from a peak. It was a true disciple. He was a genius of Yi Yuan School, although not as talented as Qi Fifan and the other strongest true disciples, but he was also prestigious, very young, only about 100 years old and had already stepped into the 6th stage of Truth Realm. He was one of the genius peerless experts with limitless future prospects. In fact, the sect had put great efforts in nurturing a genius like him. You are courting death. Do you actually think you alone can stop me? The 8th prince said with a disdainful smile on his face, more than 100 years of practice, but you are nothing but a waste. You are bringing about your own destruction. That disciple's face suddenly flushed with anger. Even though he knew that in the future, he would probably not be an opponent of the 8th prince, but as an especially nurtured genius disciple of the sect, his pride would not allow him retreat. The true disciple instantly shot an eternal light descended from the sky and swept towards the 8th prince. I'll fulfill your wish of dying. The 8th prince shot as well and instantly swept off as if a mountain of Zhenyuan which went whistling towards the incoming attack. The 8th prince's attack immediately swept away as many things as possibly in the surrounding area. Boom! As the two attacks collided severely, it seemed as if the heaven and the earth were collapsing, setting off overwhelming air explosions everywhere. However, in just a flash of contact, the 8th prince's attack routed that true disciple's attack and instantly rushed towards that genius true disciple, while sweeping away all of the things on the way along with it. All of a sudden, he was completely cornered and had no way out. Poof! The genius disciple suddenly spurted out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying upside down. He got blasted away horizontally and his body was almost torn to pieces. As he fell down and fainted, the other true disciples immediately took him to the depths of Yi Yuan School to find an elder to treat him. Everyone held their breath when they saw how the 8th prince used just one shot to seriously wound that true disciple. This eighth prince truly possessed earth-shattering might, and even the experts at the same cultivation level weren't his opponents. At this time, the disciple realized that this outcome was definitely the result of the eighth prince's recent adventure trip to an ancient ruin. No one knew what kind of heritage and treasures he obtained there, which turned him into such a fearful expert. Probably, he was now almost 10 or maybe 100 times more powerful than before. Pay attention, you ignorant disciples of Yi Yuan school. The eighth prince said contemptuously, sooner or later, I will bring you all under my royal reign. At this time, one could see the anger burning on the faces of Yi Yuan school's disciples. After all, the eighth prince was actually looking down on them. However, after witnessing the scene where the blue sky was dyed red with that true disciple's blood, no one dared to step forward. Arrogant fool, don't you know you are standing right now? Suddenly, a voice burst out of the depths of Yi Yuan school, and just then, the void was directly torn apart and a big hand instantly grasped towards the eighth prince. This was the power of the world law, and it firmly fixed him on the ground. Old fool, we old guys shouldn't intervene into the matter of young people. Abruptly, a hoarse voice transmitted from behind the eighth prince. And, in a flash, a big hand stretched out and severely clashed into the other big hand. Boom! A loud and terrifying explosion occurred and completely distorted the space. Now, everyone came to know that there was tyrannical expert behind the eighth prince, standing in his support. It should be a peerless master who backed the eighth prince, no wonder he dared to come alone to Yi Yuan school. But, since he had a peerless master with him, he would be most useful than a mighty force. Humph, our head has already said that this duel is not allowed, do you not know? The voice coming from the depths of Yi Yuan school asked. You should understand, this is the matter of young people, we must not meddle. In our young times, didn't we go on expeditions like this? Just remember, the winner takes all. The hoarse voice immediately replied. You old fox, don't you try to tamper with the concept, you know what our head means. Yi Xuan has not yet fully grown up, and know that if this duel is to take place 10 years from now, then we won't be having this argument right now. What if we send Qi Fifan to fight with your eighth prince, will that make you happy? The voice coming from Yi Yuan school said disdainfully. The voice remained silent this time. However, the eighth prince suddenly spoke. The period of 10 years is too long, I make good use of my time. I will surely manage to increase my cultivation at the same rate he does for the next 10 years, so even after 10 years, he will be easily slaughtered by me, so why do you stop me now? The eighth prince sneered and said, I'm invincible, and no matter how powerful my enemy is, I will kill them all. One could see an absolute self-confidence hidden in his strong words, which were definitely the result of going on expeditions for so many years. Yi Xuan, I am ready to pull down my cultivation to match with yours. Now, I dare you to take up my challenge. The eighth prince shouted, and the mighty sound waves instantly swept off towards Yi Yuan school. Can it be that you are too scared to come out? Are you afraid of death? Several disciples were holding their anger, although the eighth prince willingly pulled down his cultivation level, but he was still at a higher level and must have grasped several deeper world laws and principles, giving him a big advantage over Yi Xuan. Why not, since you are really dying to die, I'll gladly buy you a ticket to hell. An ice-cold voice arrived from the depths of Yi Yuan school, and the blue silhouette of a person rushed flying from a peak. At this time, a youth, clad in blue clothes, flew towards the eighth prince. He released a dreadful imposing aura which was surging high into the sky. His eyes were as deep as the stars as he was coldly staring at the eighth prince. Yi Xuan arrived way too fast, and a dense bluish aura swept out of his body. There was an incomparably horrifying aura creeping around his body, giving him the presence of the reincarnation of an ancient emperor. They didn't collide, but their terrifying auras severely collided and set off shock waves in all directions. So you finally came to meet your death? The eighth prince said in a cold voice. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.